The first organisms to develop on Earth in abundance were bacteria. They live exclusively in the oceans. These organisms colonize warm environments such as the edges of hydrothermal springs or other extreme environments. They assimilate mineral matter by chemical reaction without the need for light or oxygen, and were able to survive in astonishing conditions. Whether it's near very hot water, up to 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit, commonly found around hot water geysers or deep within oceanic faults when plumes of burning, sulfurous mud emerge from the bowels of the Earth. Other bacteria, on the other hand, like temperatures close to the freezing point, and even thrive under the ice in frozen deserts, where the average temperature can drop below minus 68 degrees Celsius or minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Organisms can even be found in acid solutions or hyper-salty waters. Little by little, other families of bacteria are appearing, such as cyanobacteria. Their main characteristic is the presence of pigments that enable them to capture and transform light energy. The most extraordinary pigment in terms of its complexity and role is chlorophyll. This molecule transforms the sun's energy to assimilate mineral matter. This photosynthesis reaction releases oxygen, which dissolves in water. This is how the first plant bacteria began to oxygenate the water in which they lived. They left their mark on Earth in the form of the fossil formations known as stromatolites. At that time, oxygen was harmful. A veritable planetary upheaval was about to take place. Over several 100 million years, the liquid environment of life evolved and became loaded with oxygen. All bacteria sensitive to this gas died out. Some, which may have been sensitive to the corrosive action of oxygen, gradually adapt until they eventually use it. This change radically alters the animal kingdom. New forms of life appeared, such as eukaryotes, and over hundreds of millions of years, the fauna became more complex. Cells began to cluster together, whereas until then they had remained isolated, and the first multicellular animals appeared. The sponge is the oldest known animal. It is thought to have appeared over 890 million years ago. These primitive animals had no nervous, vascular, or digestive systems. Over several million years, these primitive animals evolved into the first, more complex animals during the Ediacaran period 600 million years ago. While living organisms were mostly simple, made up of individual cells, or sometimes grouped together in colonies, a veritable zoological Big Bang occurred during the Cambrian, between 541 and 530 million years ago. This explosion of organisms led to the sudden appearance of most of today's major phyla of multicellular animals. This event initiated a gigantic diversification of animal, plant, and bacterial classes and species. The Earth consists of a single continent, Rodinia, surrounded by an immense ocean called Merovia. But this supercontinent is beginning to break up, and new pieces of continent are appearing. The largest of these will occupy most of the southern hemisphere, Proto-Gondwana. To the north, the other pieces form a large archipelago, with Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia. The planetary climate is warm, around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. In the center of Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia, an ocean called Iapetus forms. In its shallows, animal life explodes. Most were soft-bodied animals such as worms and sponges, but there were also the first arthropods, distant ancestors of today's insects and crustaceans, ancestors of future cephalopods, as well as animals that had no descendants. They all evolved on the ocean floor. This new fauna now possesses internal and external organs such as eyes, legs, digestive system, antennae, mouth apparatus. A food chain now exists. Microorganisms such as trilobites form the bottom of this chain, and at the very top is a super predator, Anomalocaris. Anomalocaris is a genus of arthropods and the first known predator in the history of life. Its distinctive feature is its large, complete visual organs, compound eyes. 2 to 3 centimeters or 1 inch long, they have 16,000 facets. Its eyesight, though primitive, enables it to distinguish potential prey, which is already a formidable evolutionary asset. Its long, narrow body measures less than a meter. It is covered by a mineral-free exoskeleton and possesses a toothy mouth, flexible legs, and a long V-shaped tail, which must have enabled it to propel itself swiftly through the water. Its 28 lateral fins are arranged in pairs. Alongside him are many other animals, each more original than the last. Less spectacular in terms of size, Hallucinogea sparsa has a long, slender, worm-like body, measuring up to 3 centimeters or 1 inch. A predatory ancestor of cephalopods, Nectocaris pteryx, is described as having a head with 2 eyes, 1 or 2 pairs of appendages, and an oval carapace at the rear. But the specimen that really catches our attention is the famous Pangea, a species of worm or eel just a few centimeters long. Its protodorsal spine suggests that it was the first animal of the chordate phylum, or even the precursor of the vertebrate branch. Today, however, there is no unanimity on this last point. This animal has a chord, a primitive spinal column running the length of the animal. It is from this chord that the muscles and organs that make up the animal are assembled. In the space of a few million years, all the pieces needed for the great adventure of the evolution of the animal world were in place. This Cambrian explosion was halted at the end of the period by an extinction caused by glaciation and a sudden change in temperature. Nearly 40% of species became extinct. Although ecological niches were left vacant, they were rapidly taken over by surviving species during the Ordovician period, leading to evolutionary radiation. Glaciation lowered sea levels and increased the number of shoals. The surviving species multiply, and although the ocean is calmer, it soon becomes populated by animals of all kinds. The families and genera of marine organisms multiply. This is the event of the Great Ordovician biodiversification. The rapid diversification of plankton favored the development of marine fauna living on the ocean floor. Crinoids, bivalve brachiopods, and trilobites multiply, but new arrivals also develop. Corals colonize the oceans and build coral reefs. They enrich the marine fauna. Land seems lifeless, and yet, on closer inspection, a few lichens are beginning to set their sights on it. A lichen is a fungus associated with an algae that grows where no plant can live. The fungus and the algae live in a symbiotic relationship, rather like coral. The fungus protects the algae. It protects it with water and mineral salts. The algae produces sugars and other products that it shares with the fungus. They can be found on rocks by the sea or on cooled lava. At first sight, nothing very extraordinary, and yet, when they rot, lichens leave debris that forms a soil rich enough for moss and other plants to grow. The ground is slowly prepared. The tiny advance of life on Earth is about to be halted by a mass extinction. Glaciation sets in, wiping out many species and slowing down the momentum that some life forms were beginning to build up out of the water. The ocean, once teeming with life, is now calm. Many families, genera, and species of animals and plants have disappeared. There's a kind of void, but nature hastened to fill it, and the surviving species underwent an evolutionary radiation. The continents continue to move. Siberia, Baltica, and Laurentia, which had formed a mega-archipelago, moved closer to Proto-Gondwana. Over time, they formed the supercontinent Laurasia. The collision of these lands gave rise to a gigantic mountain range, the Caledonian Chain. Then the ice began to melt. Ocean levels rise, and certain species develop considerably. With the ice cap gone, the climate becomes mild again, with temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. What about the mainland? We find the lichens that were already starting to appear before the extinction. The first mosses are now appearing, and the flora will begin to establish itself out of the water. While life abounded in the depths of the sea, the landscape on land at the time consisted of bare, wind-swept rock as far as the eye could see. Then, as they pass, high and low tides leave sediments at the water's edge. This sediment is the first holdfast for plant life. The oldest known trace of primitive plants is that of Cooksonia. High and low tides and the consequent alternation between the passage of water and the drying out of the water allow the flora to gradually become accustomed to life outside the water. Cooksonia plants grow to less than 10 centimeters in height and have a relatively simple structure. They have no leaves or flowers, only a stem that divides into several branches. Each branch ends in a rounded sporangium containing the spores. A priori, it has no roots and is attached to the ground by radicals, fine, superficially concentrated roots. Cooksonia plants release their spores into the air to reproduce. Cooksonia and the other primitive plants are confronted with the phenomenon of gravity, a physics that is new to them. They evolved by developing a hydraulic internal skeleton and a protective layer of wax. They are better able to support their own weight and cope with drought. The cuticle prevents the plant's water from evaporating, but it also forms a layer impermeable to carbon dioxide and oxygen. Over time, plants will develop tiny openings called stomata, enabling them to breathe through the air. Some have cells to distribute water and nutrients to higher organs, but at the time of the first plants, the soil was poor in nutrients. So plants develop rhizomes, like roots, to draw the food they need from the ground. Even though the soil was still almost non-existent, plants themselves helped to build it by breaking down the rocks on which they ventured. A little later, they develop outgrowths to increase the surface area exposed to solar energy. All these primitive plants must also find a way to reproduce. They cannot, like marine plants, discharge their gametes into the water. They must now find an aerial means of reproduction. This is done via spores. These are spread by the wind, and as they germinate, produce male or female organs, which in turn release their sex cells into the moist soil. The higher the plant, the more efficient the spore dispersal. This is why some plants try to grow taller, which also gives them the advantage of capturing even more of the sun's energy than their ground-level counterparts. Now, they need to give their stems more strength to support their weight and height. To this end, they add a woody support tissue. They can grow taller and develop an ever-increasing diameter. Plants reach ever greater heights, with trunks measuring at least 10 centimeters or 4 inches in diameter. This may seem ridiculous compared with our present-day forests, but this primitive vegetation has nonetheless allowed other visitors to venture onto dry land. A few critters docked and ventured out onto the newly forming vegetation. But who are these curious little creatures? Probably earthworms, as life teems in the mud, or even mites. But the first real fossilized traces discovered are those of an extinct species of arthropod. The ebb and flow of the sea washes all kinds of organic waste and corpses onto the shore. This highly attractive food is a great incentive for carnivorous organisms to leave the waters. What's more, the desert is slowly becoming clothed in mosses, lichens, and other primitive plants, a tempting exploration ground for certain organisms. Curious, tiny, and discreet inhabitants shelter between grains of earth and roots beneath a layer of decomposing vegetation on which they feed. Primitive insects swarm in the midst of this growing vegetation. At first, the largest are no bigger than a few millimeters. They look like springtails, the pan-crustaceous jumping arthropods that populate our land today. Some are carnivores, feeding on the corpses of other animals, and others feed on plants, but none seem to attack them until they have rotted. Living plants certainly contain toxins they couldn't survive. It is these little beasts, so insignificant at first sight, that will eventually populate the whole Earth. Today, there are over 1.3 million known species of insect. They occupy almost every ecological niche. But this dominance didn't happen overnight. Although insects diversified very early on, in the Carboniferous period, they were initially present in small numbers. Cambricaris obanensis belongs to the myriapod genus, closely related to millipedes. Its fossil was discovered in Scotland. Its legs have not been preserved. The animal measures approximately 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch in length. Its body is segmented. It evolved in an environment close to bodies of water, and certainly fed on decomposing plants. Although not their ancestor, they bear a striking resemblance to today's millipedes. Its body is covered by a carapace that is synthesized by its glands. Cooksonia fossils have been found in the same region. Strudiella devonica is a species of fossil arthropod. It is one of the oldest terrestrial insects found, and the only complete fossil insect. This small insect, measuring around 8 millimeters in length, appears to be a close relative of the early grasshoppers. It has a relatively large head, with robust mandibles and long antennae. This specimen is wingless, which prevents scientists from knowing whether it is a larva or an adult. Strudiella devonica has all the morphological features and organs required for terrestrial life. Its unspecialized mouthparts indicate that it had an omnivorous diet. The fossil shows 6 body segments, 6 legs, and 2 antennae. The genitalia have not been preserved. The first arthropods to set foot on Earth were faced with a number of difficulties. They needed a structure strong enough to support them, as well as arrangements to protect them from ultraviolet light and desiccation. They also needed to find food. Surprisingly, most arthropods are carnivores, and few are herbivores. And to satisfy carnivores, prey must be available. Dry land is still relatively devoid of life, and the first arthropods may have had to make do with fungi, molds, or rotting leaves. The first plants were therefore not a source of food, but they helped to shape the first ecosystems that gradually spread across the land. At the same time, as life was gaining ground on land, it was demonstrating real innovation in marine organisms. The Devonian is reputed to be the period known as the Age of Fish. Numerous gigantic armored fish, known as placoderms, crisscrossed the oceans, including Bothriolepis, Silurians, and Dunkleosteus. While life on land is represented only by small organisms, life in the oceans is luxuriant. Its evolution was not unrelated to the emergence from the sea. Placoderms are the vertebrates that dominate the marine world. They are highly diversified, frequenting both reefs and the open sea. They feed on algae, mollusks, and other fish. They owe their name placoderm to the plates that cover their skin. Their head and thorax are covered by a thick bony armor that protects vital organs such as the eyes, brain, and heart from predators. Their enormous jaws, made of bone with sharp edges, are like pincers that can cut their prey in two. Although placoderms were the first to be equipped with jaws, they still lack teeth. Around 400 million years ago, the group of jawed fish diversified into 2 major groups. On the one hand, cartilaginous fish, from which sharks, rays, and other chimeras evolved, and on the other, bony fish. Subsequently, bony fish are divided into 2 groups. Bony fish, known as actinopterygians, have fins with keratin rays, the protein that makes up hair, nails, and horns. The rays are shaped like arms that support the fin fan. Alongside them, bony fish with fleshy or lobed fins are called sarcopterygians. Their fins are characterized by bones that form an articulated internal skeleton. The ventral fin bones are identical in number and positioned to those of the tetrapod extremities. This new form of fin is now articulated around a single element, the other rays having disappeared. It's not yet a leg, but it sure looks like one. The fin ends in a soft veil of scales. Panderichthys is an extinct genus of sarcopterygians that is considered an anatomically transitional form in the evolution from fish to tetrapod. The internal skeleton of the pectoral and pelvic fins is reminiscent of Chiridian limbs. The best-known species is Panderichthys rhombolepis, which resembles a modern-day catfish. It measures between 90 and 130 centimeters or 50 inches. It has primitive lungs. This species marks an important stage in the adaptation to terrestrial locomotion, since its fleshy pectoral fins are prototypes of tetrapod limbs. This suggests that the transition to tetrapod locomotion, which relies on hind limb propulsion, went through a stage of forelimb support accompanied by body undulation. In fact, the pelvic fins of Panderichthys rhombolepis are primitive and do not allow it to take support. A few million years later, the veil at the end of the fin would evolve into a revolutionary structure in living organisms: fingers. Meanwhile, vegetation continued to grow. Primitive plants have grown so much that they can now be called trees. It took a good 50 million years for the first giant ferns, calamites, and lepidodendrons to reach heights of over 30 meters or 100 feet. At this size, the trunk is reinforced with wood and bark, like that of today's trees. The arborescent form appeared independently in different plant groups. Archaeopteris is like a fern with a coniferous trunk. It thrives in well-drained areas where it can develop its extensive root system. It contributes to the formation of deep soils. It can reach heights of up to 40 meters or 130 feet, and measure up to 1.5 meters or 5 feet in diameter. Its wood is similar to that of conifers, with tracheids and rays. Many scientists have studied the anatomy of its trunk, making it the first modern tree. The wood of Archaeopteris becomes both a conductive tissue and a support element, an ideal combination for seeking light at height. Watieza is a close relative of modern ferns and horsetails. It is one of the components of the oldest forests and is considered the oldest arborescent plant. Its general appearance is reminiscent of modern palm trees or tree ferns. It can reach heights of up to 8 meters. Instead of leaves, Watieza has fronds located in the crown in a vertical position and positioned helically on the trunk. In some plants, fronds play the role of leaves. They are often large and divided into segments. As it grows, Watieza loses its fronds, leaving scars on the surface tissue of the stem. The trunk is rather thin, with grooves in the area around the crown, the scars of the lost fronds. This tall plant remains upright thanks to its inverted conical morphology and the large number of small roots that penetrate perpendicularly into the soil. One representative of the first forests is the Gilboa petrified forest in the United States. This forest was discovered during the excavation of a quarry to build the Gilboa Dam. Hundreds of large fossilized stumps preserved in the rock were identified. It would take several years of study and research to understand this forest a little better. The bases of the trees making up the forest are bowl-shaped, and their diameter can reach up to 2 meters or 7 feet. Thousands of roots surround them. According to estimates, the tree could reach up to 10 meters or 33 feet in height, and resemble palm trees or tree ferns. Horizontal woody stems, measuring around 15 centimeters or 6 inches in diameter, were also discovered. These are creeping trunks of a neurophytalian progymnosperm, previously known only for their upright branches. A large specimen of lycopod was also discovered. This herbaceous plant has axes covered with small, narrow, microphyllous leaves. Fertile leaves have 5 segments, like vegetative leaves, and sporangia are inserted on the upper surface of each. This primitive forest already displays extraordinary complexity. The Tiktaalik roseae is the only known species of Tiktaalik, which literally means great fish of the low waters. The Tiktaalik has all the characteristics of a fish. It has scales and gills, but its triangular, flattened head and unusually shaped fins stand out. In fact, in addition to the fine ray-shaped bones that all fish have for paddling, the fins have much stronger internal bones, enabling the animal to wedge itself in shallow water using its limbs for support. This is what most four-legged animals do. This particular fin makes Tiktaalik a transitional species between fishes and Pandarictus, and the future first tetrapods, Acanthostega and Ichthyostega. The fins of Tiktaalik roseae have wrist bones and simple finger-like rays. It has gills but also primitive lungs. This enables it to establish itself in shallow waters and on land. Its scales are diamond-shaped, its teeth are structured in 2 rows, and it has internal and external nostrils. Most fish have bony plates in the gill area, limiting head movement. Tiktaalik roseae has none. This makes it the first known fish to have a neck and pectoral girdle separate from the skull. This gives it greater freedom to hunt prey, whether in the water or on land. The rays of Tiktaalik roseae's pectoral fins, those that evolved to form the front legs of tetrapods, have become more robust, and an asymmetry has developed between the rays on the ventral and dorsal sides. The latter become wider and more numerous than the former. This characteristic has resulted in a fleshy, palm-like part that the animal can use to hold itself up on the ground or in rivers. This suggests the presence of muscles under the fins to support the animal's weight when pulling itself up in the open air. Another visible evolution on the animal is that its eyes and nostrils are positioned above the head. As brackish waters are low in oxygen, it is forced to breathe at the surface. This feature enables it to breathe without taking its head out of the water, like today's crocodiles. Tiktaalik rosea is somewhere between a fish and a tetrapod. Its anatomical characteristics make it an intermediate species. Acanthostega and Ichthyostega were among the first tetrapods, defined as legged fish. They were aquatic animals with gills, but their 8-toed legs enabled them to navigate muddy, cluttered environments out of the water. Acanthostega is considered one of the first terrestrial vertebrates. It has chiridial limbs, articulated locomotor appendages equipped with fingers, an anatomical feature of the first tetrapods. Acanthostega measures around 60 centimeters in length. On each of its hands it has 8 fingers linked by a tendinous sheath. It has no wrists but a shoulder and a forelimb similar to those of a fish. However, the shoulder and forelimb cannot be bent forward or at the elbow, and cannot be used for standing or walking. He therefore had to use them for paddling or clinging to vegetation. Its pelvic girdle becomes a load-bearing structure, enabling it to counteract the force of gravity when it is no longer in the water. Although Acanthostega has lungs, its ribs are too short to support the rib cage outside an aquatic environment. Many scientists agree that Acanthostega would never have lived outside the sea and would have been primarily an aquatic animal. It must have come ashore to find food. Its jaw shows a difference from that of fish, which would have enabled it to feed on food either out of the water or on land. Alongside Acanthostega, Ichthyostega is one of the oldest known four-limbed vertebrates. Ichthyostega is a rather large animal for its time, measuring around 1.5 meters or 5 feet in length. Its eyes are set on top of a flattened skull, and it has large teeth. Its limbs are long, with 7 toes on each end of the hind limbs. The morphology of its shoulder and pelvic girdles is more robust and better adapted to terrestrial life than that of Acanthostega. Its vertebrae are also stronger. How did the fingers get added to the limb tips of these early tetrapods? Were the fingers pre-existing elements, or did they transform and evolve over time? The latest research suggests that the fingers originated from abnormal growth of the fin tips. In the fish embryo, the fin tips form the apical ridge through which the bony rays of the fin are formed. Once all the rays have formed, the ridge peels off, stopping the construction of new bony structures on the fin. The fin then forms a veil and completes its development. The anomaly that led to the development of the fingers would have been that the apical ridge failed to detach. After forming the bones of the arm, forearm, and wrist, it then went on to build the phalanges. With their fingers, Acanthostega and Ichthyostega were able to survey muddy deltas dotted with plants and tree branches. They were able to spread branches and wade through mud, as well as move from one arm of a river to the other. Their life remained essentially aquatic. Their legs are still not very functional, as the absence of joints makes them very rigid. As they have no ankles, they are unable to extend themselves. These protopatties are therefore only good for carrying fish and being used as paddles for travel. Finally, at the end of the Devonian period, 360 million years ago, these legs came in very handy. Terrestrial environments became increasingly vast as ocean levels dropped. Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, along with their tetrapod congeners, are able to reach isolated bodies of water and rivers. They survived this new environment better than others. It was during the Carboniferous period that flexible ankles, wrists, and elbows gave them incredible mobility. They could now leave the water's edge and venture out to conquer the immense forests that had in the meantime colonized dry land. Soon after Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, sea scorpions and spiders reached dry land. But this conquest was halted by another massive glaciation, which led to a mass extinction. 75% of the species that existed in the Devonian disappeared. The Earth emerges from a major mass extinction, resulting in the death of many animals. At this time, the continents Laurasia and Gondwana come together to form a supercontinent called Pangaea. It is surrounded by the Panthalassa Ocean. Tectonic plate movements cause sea levels to rise. Many of the plants that remain on dry land are drowned. But nature has not said its last word. Forests continue to colonize. In the midst of tree ferns and giant horsetails, a new tree has appeared, the Lepidodendron. It's one of the giant lycopods, oversized plants that have dominated the Earth for a long time. The Lepidodendron reaches heights of over 50 meters or 165 feet, with a trunk 2 meters or 7 feet in diameter. Its trunk is firmly anchored to the ground by numerous roots. It has no intermediate branches, but is topped by a crown of foliage arranged like a parasol. This is when bark and seed trees appear. Bark trees became the source of coal, which was used in abundance during the Industrial Revolution. Following fires or floods, these trees were buried and formed sediments. Deprived of air and subjected to high pressure, organic elements are transformed into carbon compounds. The emergence of seed plants was a botanical revolution and a new step in the development of life on land. Henceforth, plant reproduction was no longer dependent on water and became aerial. The elements that ensure the plant's dissemination are no longer spores, but seeds. These multicellular seeds are protected by protective envelopes formed by the lignified integuments of the ovule. They contain not only an embryo, but also the reserves such as carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins needed for its development during the early stages. The seed detaches from the plant and ensures the dissemination of the species. Their tiny size and hooks enable them to attach themselves to animals, while their appendages provide a grip on the wind, all characteristics that facilitate dispersal. Seeds also have another fundamental characteristic. Their tissues are dehydrated, allowing them to enter dormancy when conditions are unfavorable for germination. Seeds can therefore be buried in the soil for several years before germinating. Animals continue to develop and adapt to dry land. In the mid-Carboniferous, sea levels drop again. The extension of terrestrial environments isolates bodies of water. But tetrapods now have limbs that can bend, and they adapt very well to this new environment. They also have lungs and are ready to conquer the gigantic Carboniferous forests that offer them a moist, shady environment in which to live. Amphibians were the first tetrapods. They were able to live both in water and on land. They had lungs to breathe air, but they also had to lay their eggs in water. But a new phylum appeared during the Carboniferous period, the reptiles. These were the first tetrapods to be fully adapted to life on land. They had a body covered in scales that protected them from predators and the elements. They also laid their eggs on land. Insects developed rapidly during this period. Insects have diversified very rapidly since they first appeared. By the Carboniferous, they accounted for at least 60% of biodiversity. In just a few million years, this group outnumbered their main terrestrial competitors. Their secret? A very useful feature for survival in this world of predators: wings. The group of wingless insects known as apterygotes represents just 1% of today's insects. Their congeners have largely overtaken them. The appearance of wings is difficult to date and explain. Perhaps they were gills, modified to enable aquatic organisms to fly short distances? This is just one hypothesis among many. What is certain is that thanks to their gravity-defying wings, insects were the sole masters of the air for several million years. Although flora, with the appearance of seed plants, gradually freed themselves from the aquatic environment, animals remain dependent on water for their food, and above all for their reproduction. A major innovation occurred around 310 million years ago with the appearance of the amnion. This is the envelope that allows the amniote embryo to develop in a liquid environment. Its innovative feature is that it can be laid out of the water. The embryo is thus protected from drying out and shocks. At the same time, some animals are equipped with a dry, more or less watertight skin to slow down water loss through the skin. Several groups of vertebrates, such as reptiles, birds, and mammals, were equipped with an amniotic sac. These groups of animals can now move away from the aquatic environment, as can amphibians, which remain water-dependent. The amniotic egg combined with the waterproof skin of the first reptiles enabled them to venture into continental areas previously inaccessible to them. They diversified, giving rise to numerous groups such as crocodilians, turtles, lizards, snakes, birds, and mammals. The appearance of the first flowering plants in the history of life on Earth is very difficult to date, as they are difficult to fossilize. Nonetheless, they play an essential role for the plants that bear them, attracting insects for pollen dissemination. Exceptional paleontological deposits have led to the discovery of two extremely well-preserved flowers. The first, Archifructus, resembles today's water lilies, but its anatomical organization remains unclear. The second, Montsechia, has long, narrow stems. Numerous fruits are found throughout the plant. These primitive flowering plants have little in common with the more classic flowers we know today. Since they first appeared, flowering plants have continued to diversify. Today, there are over 270,000 species in all environments, whether on land or in water. They range in size and shape from orchids to oak trees. By comparison, the fern group comprises 10,000 species, and the pine and associated species group around 750. And yet, these two groups are much older than flowering plants. The latter are therefore a true evolutionary success story. This is perhaps due to the way flowering plants reproduce, enabling them to rapidly colonize all types of environment. Fauna and flora are now well established on land. Although they will suffer disasters over the years, leading to more or less profound modifications, nothing will totally wipe them out. What are the effects of this outflow of water on the Earth? The colonization and establishment of life on the continents caused major changes to planet Earth over hundreds of millions of years. Land plants were the first to colonize the Earth outside water. Their roots contribute to soil formation. They break up rocks, facilitating the concentration of organic matter. Soils are essential for plant growth and have important geological implications, particularly with regard to erosion and land stability. Plant roots help prevent soil erosion by stabilizing the soil. Forests and meadows help to slow the flow of water. Particles transported by watercourses can thus be sedimented. This contributes to the formation of sedimentary rock. Certain living organisms, such as lichens and bacteria, promote the chemical alteration of rocks by releasing organic acids that can dissolve minerals. As a result, rocks disintegrate and soils are formed. Living organisms are mainly made up of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. When they die, organic matter is decomposed by microbial activity. If this happens in an aerobic environment, all the carbon is converted into carbon dioxide, and mineralization is complete. If, on the other hand, this takes place in an anaerobic environment, mineralization stops as soon as all the oxygen initially present has been consumed. Most of the biomass undergoes total mineralization. The remaining 1%, which sediments, is the source of oil, natural gas, and coal. In this way, the accumulation of plant debris in rapidly sedimenting areas during the Carboniferous period created large reserves of carbon that are used today in the form of coal. The weathering of limestone can then be accelerated, leading to the formation of caves. Caves are underground voids of varying sizes. Microbial activity in the soil contributes to the production of carbon dioxide. The appearance of life and its emergence from the waters involve complex interactions between chemical elements, geological processes, and living organisms. This has had a major impact on the establishment and evolution of biogeochemical cycles. These cycles are essential to the regulation of ecosystems and the survival of life on Earth. Biogeochemical cycles are the processes by which elements or chemical compounds are transported or transformed between the major terrestrial reservoirs, the geosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere, in which the biosphere is found. Through a series of processes, elements move from one medium to another, returning to their original environment in an infinite recycling loop. Living organisms need a constant and regular supply of essential elements such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur to ensure their survival. Elements circulate continuously from one environment to another, from one form to another. They are found in soil, atmosphere, water, and living tissue. This continuous circulation is known as the biogeochemical cycle. These cycles combine biological, chemical, and geological processes. Biological processes are defined as respiration or digestion. Chemical processes are combustion or synthesis reactions. The latter two take place over relatively short periods of time. Geological processes, on the other hand, occur over much longer timescales and are defined by erosion or sedimentation. The establishment of biogeochemical cycles on Earth is a complex process that has developed over billions of years. These cycles have evolved in response to interactions between chemical elements, geological processes, living organisms, and terrestrial, aquatic, and atmospheric environments. The colonization of land by plants and animals has had a major impact on biogeochemical cycles. Many mechanisms are involved, but let's take a look at the four most important cycles. The carbon cycle. The significant greening of continents apart from the polar and desert regions is a major change in Earth's history. This conquest of land by plants is not without consequences, as terrestrial plants are important players in the carbon cycle. Plants use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to form their own living matter through the process of photosynthesis. In addition, their root cells breathe and release some CO2 into the soil. This creates acidic solutions in their vicinity and encourages the weathering of rocks, which in the long term traps carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The development of terrestrial vegetation also deepens soils by a few centimeters to 1 meter on average. The increase in continental vegetation has reduced the greenhouse effect and cooled the climate. In the long term, dead organic matter accumulates on the soil in the form of plant biomass, helping to form soils rich in organic carbon. This is then buried and transformed into fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, or natural gas. This transformation requires soil carbon sequestration. The nitrogen cycle. The massive arrival of plants on land has also had an impact on the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is the most abundant gas in the atmosphere. Today's air contains 78% of it. This element is essential to the functioning of living organisms, since it is used to make proteins and produce the nitrogenous bases present in DNA. However, it cannot be directly assimilated in its initial form by most living organisms. We must therefore rely on bacteria to transform atmospheric nitrogen into a form that can be assimilated by other organisms. Through its biogeochemical cycle, nitrogen passes from one form to another. Bacteria, such as cyanobacteria and rhizobium, which live in symbiosis with plants, capture atmospheric nitrogen and transform it into ammonia, which is then used directly by plants and animals and reacts with hydrogen to form ammonium. Oxidation reactions then come into play, with some bacteria oxidizing ammonium to form nitrite, while others oxidize nitrite to form nitrate. Transported in soil or water, nitrate and ammonium are captured by plants through their roots. Nitrogen now fixed on plants is available to herbivorous animals and is passed on in the terrestrial food chain. Carnivorous animals ingest nitrogen by feeding on herbivorous animals. Nitrogen is then present in plant and animal waste. Certain fungi and bacteria decompose it and produce ammonia, which dissolves to form ammonium. Certain bacteria, known as denitrifying bacteria, convert nitrate into dinitrogen, returning it directly to the atmosphere. The phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle was greatly disrupted when living organisms colonized dry land. Phosphorus is essential to life. It is a basic material in DNA, bones, shells, and teeth. The phosphorus cycle is sedimentary, meaning that it does not involve atmospheric processes, as it has virtually no gaseous components. The main source of phosphorus is the erosion of sedimentary rocks. Under the action of rain and wind, small quantities of phosphorus escape from the rocks. It is released in the form of dissolved phosphate and enters the food chain, starting with plants. The latter directly assimilate this essential element for their growth. Herbivores then feed on the plants, which are then eaten by carnivores. Phosphates are returned to the soil via animal feces and urine, as well as through the degradation of animals and plants once they have died. However, over time, some phosphorus has been leached from the soil and transported to the oceans, where it has become trapped in marine sediments. Human activities have resulted in additional phosphorus inputs. The mining of these phosphates for fertilizer production has altered the phosphorus cycle, leading to environmental disturbances such as eutrophication of watercourses. Water quality declines, affecting the ecosystem and the aquatic environment. The water cycle. The proliferation of terrestrial vegetation has influenced the water cycle by promoting evapotranspiration. This is the process by which terrestrial liquid water is returned to the atmosphere in gaseous form. This water comes from the sublimation of snow, the evaporation of free water, or water buried in the ground, and also from plant transpiration. How do plants, and trees in particular, transpire? You've probably noticed how nice and cool it is in the heart of a forest when it's hot. A tree actively cools the surrounding air, like a parasol, which simply reflects the sun's rays. A tree combines both actions. To grow, plants need nutrients and CO2, which they absorb and store through photosynthesis. Sap circulates through the tree, transferring mineral salts to the leaves for photosynthesis. Transpiration is the driving force, transporting water and nutrients to the leaves. sap flows are regulated according to plant needs and climatic conditions. Transpiration takes place in the leaves, at the stomata, and in the lenticels on the bark of trunks and branches. Depending on environmental conditions, stomata may close to avoid excessive water loss. Nevertheless, the quantity of water released by a tree during evapotranspiration is very significant. For an oak tree, this amounts to 1,000 liters of water per day. Evapotranspiration is an essential component of the water cycle. Although it represents only a small part of the overall water cycle, it is fundamental. It transfers water from the soil and vegetation to the atmosphere. At present, urbanization, deforestation, and other practices that make soil impermeable reduce evapotranspiration and alter the water cycle by altering the infiltration of water into the soil. The consequences are flooding, reduced groundwater reserves, and changes in precipitation patterns. Life could not emerge from the water until it had a shield to protect it from the sun's ultraviolet rays. This is the ozone layer. Oxygen is present in 3 forms in the atmosphere. There are oxygen atoms, O, oxygen molecules, O2, which represent the oxygen we breathe, and ozone, O3. Ozone is a molecule made up of 3 oxygen atoms. It is a colorless gas, but has a very strong odor. Ozone is formed in a section of the atmosphere known as the stratosphere. In this region, high-energy solar photons can strike oxygen molecules and separate the 2 oxygen atoms. When a free oxygen atom comes into contact with an oxygen molecule O2, an ozone molecule is formed. Ozone is then naturally degraded in the stratosphere through a series of chemical transformations under the effect of the sun's ultraviolet rays. In an unpolluted atmosphere, ozone production and destruction exactly balance each other out. Its total concentration then remains relatively constant. Ozone naturally accumulates in the stratosphere, but is only present in abundance when there is sufficient oxygen. Scientific research estimates that the first threshold of the ozone layer was formed around 600 million years ago. This first threshold allowed an explosion of life during the Ediacaran period and later during the Cambrian. It was then present at 90% of today's ozone levels. The second threshold was reached around 400 million years ago, coinciding with the emergence of the first animals from the waters. The molecules making up living matter are photosensitive, which means they can be destroyed by certain types of radiation, such as ultraviolet light. Ozone absorbs a large proportion of ultraviolet rays, protecting living organisms from their harmful effects. When the Earth was first formed, it was covered in volcanoes, and the atmosphere consisted mainly of carbon dioxide and methane. There was no oxygen or ozone. In those days, without an ozone layer, the sun's ultraviolet rays reduced all organisms to aquatic and simple single-cell life. Around 600 million years ago, the accumulation of oxygen by cyanobacteria and other oxygen-releasing organisms enabled the atmosphere to reach a first threshold of oxygen, and thus ozone. When the first terrestrial arthropods emerged from the waters around 400 million years ago, the second threshold, equivalent to the present one, was reached. The oxygen produced by living organisms such as plants and the first forests slowly reached the upper layers of the atmosphere, where it was degraded by ultraviolet radiation, giving rise to ozone. Ozone supports the development of life when it is present in the stratosphere, above 15 kilometers or 9 miles in altitude. Ozone concentrations peak at around 25 kilometers or 15 miles above sea level. It is precisely this ozone-rich region of the atmosphere that is known as the ozone layer. Moreover, the amount of ozone present at any given point on the Earth's surface varies according to day, season, and latitude. The emergence of life forms from the water represents a quantum leap in the evolution of life on Earth. If this has been possible, it's because life on land has many advantages over life in the water, although this largely depends on the needs and preferences of the organisms in question. Terrestrial organisms have direct access to atmospheric air, which is far more abundant in oxygen than that dissolved in the aquatic environment. This facilitates air breathing. What's more, air is less dense than water. Land-dwelling organisms don't have to fight against buoyancy, allowing for a greater diversity of body shapes and structures. On land, solar energy is harnessed to a greater extent, and body temperature is more easily regulated. Its direct use for photosynthesis is an advantage over aquatic organisms, which receive limited energy from the depths. From 485 million years, very primitive plants, resulting from association between algae and fungi, come out of the water to settle on rocks in the open air. Adorning with green the edges of the beaches and the rocks, these plants cannot extend. As soon as they go beyond the areas moistened by the spray, they dry out and do not survive. Water does not circulate in their tissues. To face the desiccation, they develop capacities of return to life. They dry out completely and rehydrate themselves as soon as the first rains come to return to life. Other plants develop an impermeable waxy film that reduces their water loss. For the moment, the plants have simple forms with a very primitive vascularization and have no leaves. They are intimately linked to the aquatic environment for their reproduction process. Mosses are among the first plants to colonize dry land. They remain low to the ground, continuously established near the shore, but manage to disperse somewhat. Mosses do not have roots. Their gas exchanges are carried out thanks to stomata, openings which open and close in order to regulate the flow. Deprived of lignin, the tegils of mosses are condemned to remain soft and have no consistency. They only rise when they grow tightly together. Mosses function like sponges. Their water-filled cells are partitioned, and they must stay close to the ground to draw water. Mosses release spores, reproductive corpuscles, onto moist soil, which will allow them to reproduce, either asexually or sexually, on an alternating basis. Sexual reproduction is important in the history of evolution because it requires the meeting and fusion of two sex cells that need a liquid medium to move and join. Each ovum is attached to the top of the stem, while the spermatozoa are released into the water and move until they reach it and fertilize it. The ovule germinates, attached to its mother plant, and produces the asexual generation, a small stem with a capsule at the top with many spores. As soon as the air becomes dry, the capsule grows, opens, and releases the spores, which are scattered by the wind. Spores that fall on moist soil will develop into young plants. Liverworts have appeared alongside mosses. These plants do not have roots, but rhizoids, filaments which fix them solidly to the substrate, without allowing them to absorb nutritive elements. The gas exchanges are done thanks to pores, openings which remain fixed. The colonization of dry land by plants is a fundamental step in the history of the Earth, because it results in a significant increase in oxygen in the atmosphere and a decrease in CO2. Plants use photosynthesis to produce their own organic matter. They draw on solar energy, extract atmospheric CO2, and release oxygen. The Earth's atmosphere is marked by a second significant increase in its oxygen concentration, the first being the Great Oxidation Crisis. The proliferation of plants on land is the origin of the formation of soils. Before, the surface of the Earth was only mineral, consisting of bare rocks and grains, such as sand and silt. The first plants to occupy the soil emerged, then died and decomposed. Litter and humus were formed, and as a result, new environments were created for the development of other plants, fungi, and animals. The mosses and liverworts spread and form vast green carpets with the appearance of real Lilliputian forests that, starting from the seashore, extend towards the interior of the land. The mainland appears lifeless. The rocky ground is now covered here and there with mosses. The temperature is about 30 degrees Celsius, or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The ozone layer is thickening, and ultraviolet rays are only partially filtered. For the living, it is better to stay underwater. The sea level is high. Gondwana is located in equatorial latitudes and is moving towards the South Pole. It is partially covered by shallow seas. Its proximity to the pole starts a drop in temperature that will gradually lead to the appearance of glaciers. But during this time, life is in full swing. Oxygen levels reach 2% of the current atmosphere, a level so low that the living beings of our time would have great difficulty in breathing. The gigantic Panthalassa Ocean covers most of the planet. It is at this time that the marine biodiversity will increase in an exceptional way. It is the great biodiversification of the Ordovician. 490 million years ago, the Earth's atmosphere was rich in CO2. The greenhouse effect induced by this gas maintained warm temperatures. Ocean temperatures could rise to 45 degrees Celsius, or 113 degrees Fahrenheit, which is not very favorable to a high level of dissolved oxygen. The development of life helps to absorb and fix CO2 through the process of photosynthesis. 30 million years later, the land cooled, and this cooling was accompanied by an increase in biodiversity. The number of genera of marine animals quadrupled. The ocean becomes an aquatic paradise, populated by creatures, all more extraordinary than the others. The water of the ocean is enriched in oxygen, which allows some animals to reach considerable sizes. The development of plankton favors the appearance of a great diversity of benthic fauna. Organisms secreting carbonate-based shells appear in mass, such as cephalopods, crinoids, and articulated brachiopods. Coral reefs develop. The first ectoprocts arrive, and mollusks become common. In the middle of these warm and sunny waters, trilobites of 60 centimeters or 24 inches long wander in search of food, plankton, pieces of algae, or animal droppings, sucking up the ocean floor. They share the waters with a brand new roommate, the Astraspis, a primitive species of fish. Despite its small size, which does not exceed 15 centimeters or 6 inches, the Astraspis has for the first time a primitive backbone and the existence of a bony carapace that protects the spine. It is the ancestor of the future living beings of the planet Earth. Astraspis is not a predator. It feeds on algae and microbes. It does not yet have a jaw, but sucks its food. It is not a very good swimmer. Its only means of defense is an armor covering its head and part of its body. Its sight allows it to distinguish shadows, and its skin reflects the vibrations of its possible predators. Faced with the Astraspis, the Orthoceras reigns over the ocean as a fearsome killer. Being able to measure up to 6 meters or 20 feet long, and weighing more than 1 kilogram or more than 2 pounds, this ruthless and insatiable carnivore is similar to the great white shark as it is feared. It has a cone-shaped shell that contains an air-filled chamber which allows it to float. Although it is feared by many species, the Eurypterid or giant sea scorpion is not afraid of it, and they regularly clash. The Eurypterid is the largest arthropod. It measures 2 meters or 6 feet long and weighs up to 130 kilograms or 290 pounds. A cross between a lobster and a monstrous scorpion, it has a needle-like jointed tail. Its giant claws are sharp and allow it to crush and cut its prey. As a true predator, it feeds on invertebrates, mollusks, and primitive fish. Arthropods, small animals of only a few centimeters or a few inches, covered with a very thin carapace, appeared already a few million years ago. During the great biodiversification of the Ordovician, their shells became harder, and they evolved into gigantic marine animals. The horseshoe crab, which was later considered a living fossil, is an aquatic animal that looks somewhat like a crab. It has a gray, brown, or black carapace. It measures up to 70 centimeters or 30 inches and weighs 5 kilograms, almost 11 pounds. Its head, very broad and rounded, contains 2 small eyes at its top. Its abdomen has 6 pairs of sharp spines and ends with a sting. With its 5 pairs of legs arranged around its mouth, it seizes food. The horseshoe crab has a particularity. It has blue blood. It is the copper contained in its blood which gives it this so particular color, whereas the blood of the vertebrates contains iron. It lives mainly on sandy or muddy bottoms of superficial oceanic waters. The horseshoe crab feeds on mollusks, small fish, worms, crustaceans. The corals land in this flourishing ecosystem. They slowly colonize the oceans and build up into coral reefs. The coral is a small animal that looks more like a plant organism, like a flowering tree. It lives attached to rocks, near the surface of warm waters or at the bottom of the sea, sometimes even in cold waters. Corals make a common skeleton, which becomes the basis of a coral reef. This skeleton can be hard or soft, but in the latter case, the corals grow faster. Coral reefs are filled with a myriad of coral species that form an ecosystem. They are home to a wide variety of animal species and serve as a refuge and food supply. Coral, like all animals, breathes oxygen and emits CO2. Except for the deep-sea coral, it is in symbiosis with a microalgae that lives inside its calcareous skeleton. The algae needs light to photosynthesize and transform CO2 into oxygen. All the waste products of the algae are assimilated by the coral, so they provide 80% of their needs. The remaining 20% is plankton that the coral captures with its small tentacles. The coral reefs contribute to enrich the marine fauna of the time. This particularly interesting period for the history of life will, however, be cut short by the first great crisis and mass extinction. The oceans on Earth teem with life, yet 6,000 light-years away a terrible cataclysm is brewing that will bring about the extinction of many species. In the Milky Way, a star at the end of its life explodes into a supernova. A gigantic explosion of gamma rays gushes out as powerful radiation. It is one of the most destructive phenomena that occurs in the universe. The energy released in about 10 seconds is equivalent to that which could be produced by 10 suns. The emitted rays disperse in the cosmos and head towards the Earth at the speed of light. They penetrate the solar system and pierce the asteroid belt. Once arrived at the level of the atmosphere, the destructive rays exterminate the air molecules and blow the atmosphere. The traces of the supernova shine in the sky alongside the sun. The impact of gamma rays has irreversible consequences for living organisms. They destroy 30% of the ozone layer, letting ultraviolet rays invade the surface of the planet. The light increases, becoming 10 times more powerful than in the Sahara. Plankton, the basis of the food chain, is destroyed, and hunger follows for the plankton eaters. Trilobites, which are used to incubate their eggs in surface waters, see their larvae die under the effect of ultraviolet rays. Many corals do not survive. The phenomenon extends over the entire surface of the planet. The base of the food chain being compromised, all species of animals are suffering from starvation. A few months later, a toxic atmosphere invades the planet, rich in nitrogen dioxide. A thick layer of haze obscures half of the sun's rays. There is less light and less heat. Temperatures drop to -12 degrees Celsius or 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The survival of many species is then threatened. The nautiloids laid their eggs, but the cold slows down the embryonic growth, and bacteria appear. Some of them see the day anyway, but the world that offers itself to them is chaotic. Food is far from abundant, and living conditions are hostile. They rely on the strength of their shells to shelter in the ocean depths from the effects of the Earth's cooling. As the temperature drops, mobile animals move around and try to find shelter. But corals, sponges, and other brachiopods cannot escape. Their calcium carbonate shells are difficult to form in cold water. They disappear. The generalized cooling of the planet causes an unpredictable climate due to important temperature differences. Strong ocean currents are formed, as well as violent disturbances. A hurricane blows on the Earth. Weakened animals are swept away without resistance. Some find refuge in the turbulent waters. The Orthoceras and its long shell do not resist the storm. The nautiloid can take refuge in the deeper waters while waiting for the lull. The storms follow one another. The corpses pile up on the shore. No predator is there to devour them. The few surviving species are undernourished. Over the years, the Earth continues to cool. A new ice age begins. The snow piles up, then becomes denser, until it builds huge glaciers. These glaciers suck the water from the oceans, which saw their level decrease by several tens of meters. Astraspis proves to be very resistant in the chaos. It follows the retreating sea and acclimates to the cold water. It swallows everything and anything. This facility allows it to continue to feed, whereas others that only feed on a specific prey do not survive if this prey disappears. Thanks to the adaptability of the Astraspis, a new generation of fish is born. This time, the bones and muscles of the gill take on the function of absorbing food. Another animal clings to life, the Eurypterid. It too follows the retreat of the oceans. With the disappearance of the Orthoceras, it has moved up a rank in the food chain. Its smaller size allows it to eat less and to adapt to the food crisis. The decrease of the ocean level draws new landscapes. Reefs appear above the water level. As glaciers continue to evolve, icebergs are forming under the surface of the water, real threats to aquatic habitats. Corals are being violently destroyed. Large areas of marine habitat are now visible on the surface, but are being eroded by the weather. The resilient ones that survive must follow the ocean, even though the habitats are shrinking. The causes of the Ordovician glaciation are not yet certain. If some think that it would be due to the explosion of a supernova near the Earth, this is difficult to prove because the traces of the latter have long since disappeared. Other hypotheses submit the idea of a sudden fall of CO2 due to the explosion of plants on the surface of the Earth, leading to a global cooling. The only thing that is certain is that the Ordovician glaciation was responsible for the disappearance of many species. This event caused the extinction of 50% of genera and 85% of species. 500,000 years after the extinction began, the Earth warmed up and the glaciers began to melt. Survivors must adapt to this new upheaval. Species that are widely distributed across all continents are more likely to survive. The Orthocera, although in bad shape, is still around. It is weakened, smaller, and becomes a prey. The Eurypterid becomes a formidable predator. The roles are reversed. The Eurypterid adopts new behaviors. The accelerated drop in sea level has led to the development of lungs in some species. The Eurypterid can now drag the carcass of its prey on the shore. Another evolution is visible in fish, the appearance of jaws. The acanthodians, scavengers cousins of the Astraspis, are no longer content to wait for the remains to come to them. They tear the flesh right off the carcass. It takes 3 million years for the Earth to calm down. The toll is heavy, but thanks to nature's astonishing form of resistance, life resumes its course. Temperatures rise again. the melting of the glaciers fills the oceans again. This rapid rise is due to the melting of water stored on the continents with a low oxygen content. The ocean is depleted, and the effects are harmful to the biosphere. At the same time, vast marine habitats are being rebuilt that welcome some known species, but also new ones. Acanthodians and Astraspis swim together and begin to venture into lakes and rivers. The Eurypterid grows to the size of a crocodile. It has no more predators. It is him who becomes the most feared. It hunts at a fast speed. The emergence of the first plants from the waters builds, a few million years later, an ideal habitat that encourages the first animals to venture out and finally settle there. These first adventurers are segmented creatures, the ancestors of our millipedes. Because of their chitin covering, they have facilities to move on the ground. At first, they do not stray far from the water's edge, but then they discover that mosses contain moisture and food through plant debris and spores. Although these myriapods are not really millipedes, some of them could reach considerable sizes, up to 2 meters long. Being basically adapted to aquatic life, they had to evolve. They acquire an external skeleton and develop a different way of breathing. Myriapods are equipped with a system of breathing tubes called tracheae. Each tube leads to the side of the carapace and splits into an increasingly fine network that leads to the organs and tissues, even penetrating each cell in order to bring them oxygen. The mode of reproduction of terrestrial life also required some changes. The spermatozoa can no longer move in the absence of water. The male and female then go to meet each other in order to transmit their sex cells. A rather laborious process, but one that bears fruit. These undulating, frisky creatures are prime prey for other species. The animals are gradually becoming more and more resistant to humidity and are continuing their terrestrial adaptation. At the same time, the plants also evolve. The Lapitous Ocean closes between the continents Laurentia, Baltica, and Avalonia, which join together and now form Laurasia. Gondwana is still located in the high latitudes, but the ice cap is less extensive. The climate stabilizes, but it is much warmer than today, with a high concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. The first plants are simple organisms. They need CO2, light, and water. From 420 million years before our era, plants diversify and develop new functions, allowing the circulation of water and nutrients. This is a decisive period for the sustainable establishment of land plants. Mosses and other primitive species do not have roots. Their vertical stems are born from horizontal stems of the same nature, the stolones, which spread on the surface of the ground. The stolones capture water. However, in some of the drier parts of the world, plants need roots to draw the water they need from the depths. 3 kinds of plants with buried structures appeared 420 million years ago: lycopods, horsetails, and ferns. Each of these new plants has stems inside, which solid vessels allow the water absorbed by the roots to circulate. They acquire a rigidity that allows them to reach significant heights. Green plants depend on sunlight for the synthesis of the substances they need. This evolution of size is then a considerable asset. The smallest plants can remain in the shade and risk dying if they are deprived of light. Lycopods, horsetails, and ferns take advantage of their new vigor to grow and become trees. Lycopods and horsetails are found in swamps and reach heights of up to 30 meters or 100 feet. Some trunks measure 2 meters or 6 feet in diameter. The landscape of the land is changing, with forests being abundant and evergreen. Some species move inland from the swamps to the ferns. The latter have large leaves spread out on the ground in order to capture as much light as possible. The animals are confronted with a change in the configuration of the forests, and this puts at risk certain species which had before access to a large variety of leaves and spores on the ground. Their food sources are now elevated towards the sky. The trunks block out a large part of the light, and the forest floor is depleted of vegetation. Some spaces even remain completely bare. This is how some polypod animals start to climb trees. Cooksonia are the first known plants with vascularized tissues. These plants are small, not exceeding 8 centimeters or 3 inches. They have a stem without leaves, flowers, or roots. Each branch ends in a sporangium, a rounded structure that contains spores. The Cooksonia are attached to the ground with thin ridges. The warm climate is also conducive to the appearance of Rhiniopsida, a vascular plant. It presents axes with ramifications and does not have roots but filaments. It sinks in the substrate, and its aerial axis rise and divide each time in 2 identical axes. Its conductive vessels are grouped in the center and covered with a bark, then with an epidermis with a cuticle and stomata. The aerial axes contain the sporangia filled with spores. 20 million years later, when the Lapitous Ocean closed, a mountain range was built within Laurasia. Under the effect of erosion, the chain is destroyed. The hot and humid climate dissolved the limestone. The rock minerals degraded and turned into clay. Other minerals release iron during their degradation. The iron oxidizes, becomes insoluble, and settles to the bottom of the sea. With time, the sediments harden and form sandstone. They cover gigantic surfaces. It is the continent of the Old Red Sandstone. With the melting of the glaciers, the ocean level rises again. This is a period of great evolution for fish. Jawless fish spread as well as the first freshwater fish. The aquatic life resumes its course, and the ocean is repopulated. The Sarcopterygians, a group of fish, appear, with, among other, the Panderichthys. This fish has a transitional anatomical structure with that of the tetrapods. Its internal skeleton, made up of fins, reminds of Chiridian members. It measures approximately 1 meter or 3 feet, and its head is similar to that of our current catfish. It has primitive lungs. Graptolites also roam the seas in colonies. These animals resemble coral polyps made of coiled and serrated tubes. These animals are grouped around a stem. They can measure from 2 millimeters to 1 meter or 3 feet in length. Some live on the surface of the ocean and drift with the currents. Others attach themselves to algae on the seafloor. A new fish appeared 375 million years ago, a link in the chain between fish and tetrapods, the Tiktaalik. This bony fish looks like a being that would be a curious mixture between fish and alligator. It has scales and fins with rays like all bony fish, but its rather massive pectoral fins resemble the limbs of the first tetrapods. They are made up of an articulated and rather rigid bony skeleton, which allows the animal to move its body in the lagoons. Its wrists and fingers allow it to support its weight and to move on the ground. Its pectoral fins are covered with large muscles and can flex like a wrist joint. This characteristic allows the tiktaalik to stop at the bottom of the water and to face the strong currents. It has a powerful rib cage to support its body out of the water. The tiktaalik ventures on land to hunt for new prey. It has gills, but also primitive lungs. The latter were initially developed not for life out of water, but to adapt to shallow and warm aquatic environments, whose waters are depleted in oxygen. Fish, which today are one of the most primitive forms of life, are then one of the most modern. In some cases, they even take on the appearance of real marine monsters. Placoderms roam the seas. The placoderm is a megapredator that dominates the seafloor from the top of its 8 meters or 26 feet length. It is muscular and armed with a sharp jaw, allowing it to have a varied diet composed of algae, mollusks, and other fish. Its head and thorax are covered with thick bony plates that protect its vital organs during attacks. Its 2 jaws are completely toothless and covered with sharp-edged bones. It is thus able to cut its prey in two. Facing the placoderm, the gigantic Dunkleosteus reaches up to 10 meters or 32 feet in length and 5 tons. This ferocious animal is an outstanding predator. Its jaw, although devoid of teeth, is nevertheless sharp like no other. It crushes its prey and then spits out the parts that are indigestible. Its head is protected by bony plates. The Eusthenopteron is an agile predator which has the particularity to have fins conceived like human members. Its endoskeleton comprises, in the anterior fins, a humerus, an ulna, and a radius distinct, and in the pelvic fin a femur, a tibia, and a fibula. 372 million years ago, the Earth is calm. It is good to live. A warm and humid climate prevails, vegetation abounds, and life proliferates and evolves. Large ferns and trees shape the landscape. Tiny insects inhabit these primitive forests. In the ocean, life in many different forms swarms. The coral reefs extend, and the seabed is a veritable underwater city in which inhabitants have found refuge. Sponges, trilobites, corals, insects, nautiloids remain. Fish are then one of the most advanced species. In parallel to this explosion of biodiversity, a cataclysm is preparing, deep in the bowels of the Earth. For even if the planet's surface remains calm, its heart is boiling. A gigantic plume pierces the ocean floor. Very hot gases are expelled from the center of the Earth, and jets of hot water surge with unprecedented force. Underwater landslides occur and destroy the reefs. For millions of animals, it is impossible to survive. Fish succumb to the heat. Volcanic eruptions and lava flows stimulate the activity of the tectonic plates. The ocean floor cracks. A new oceanic crust and new underwater volcanoes are formed. The plume infects the ocean. When the molten lava comes into contact with the seawater, it releases toxic substances. The contamination first affects the new generations. The eggs of the Eusthenopterons do not survive in these poisoned waters. Over the years, the released gas, mostly carbon dioxide, invades the Earth's atmosphere. The latter is gradually loaded with greenhouse gases. As a result, the temperature at the Earth's surface increases. The heat of the oceans is no longer redistributed. Previously, the polar cold tried to warm up towards the tropics, and vice versa for the cooling of tropical waters. From now on, the ocean freezes, the currents stop. The water in the oceans is getting warmer. The reefs can't stand it, and neither can the tiktaalik. His habitat evaporates, but he makes a decision that will allow him to save his skin. He gains the dry land in order to move away from these deadly waters. It is thanks to its anatomy that it can afford this change of habitat. Its respiratory system, half gill, half lungs, makes its life on ground and in the seas possible. It has articulated wrists and a mobile neck, and can move by crawling, or at least by wriggling. At this time, the Earth is less hostile than the sea, and the tiktaalik discovers a new environment and new sources of food. They fared better than most other fish, who once all the water in their environment had evaporated, found themselves trapped and condemned under the hot sun. 250,000 years after the eruption, the giant plume persists. The Earth is subjected to a high level of carbon dioxide and a sharp rise in temperature. It becomes an ideal ground for the proliferation of plants. It is a real paradise for plants that grow excessively and invade the land. Over the years, the dead leaves fall on the ground and accumulate in mass. They rot and form the first layer of humus. This humus, rich in nutrients, is then carried to the oceans by the rains. The algae feed on it and develop immoderately. To do so, they use oxygen and asphyxiate the aquatic life. The seas become saturated with plants, and the abundant kingdom of animals that remained is dying. A million years ago, eruptions began to hit the Earth. Until then, they had been occurring at sea. But now a gigantic volcano is gathering its forces to erupt, this time on land. The Earth shakes. The air is filled with sulfur. Geysers of lava are spat out by the volcano, several hundred meters high. A cloud of ash forms in the sky, bringing the planet into a terrifying darkness. A black veil hides the light of the sun, and the mixture of the gases gives the sky an orange color. Most of the ash dissipates into the atmosphere, but the gases that penetrate the stratosphere can remain there for several years. These gases act as a barrier to the sun's rays and plunge the Earth into a volcanic winter. Temperatures drop sharply. The ocean goes from 32 to 21 degrees Celsius. That is to say, from 90 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The tiktaaliks, who had found refuge on dry land, find themselves confronted with an unknown but invincible enemy: snow. It is cold. Their population will not survive it. As with the last mass extinction, a wide variety of causes, sometimes concurrent and often interdependent, have been proposed to explain the Devonian extinction. In any case, the volcanic winter is ending. The Earth is devastated. The marine fauna is globally affected by this mass extinction. 21% of the families, 50% of the genera, and about 75% of the marine species have disappeared. There are still some building groups in the reef environment that survive as isolated individuals. Brachiopods, cephalopods, and trilobites are experiencing a high rate of extinction. The evolutionary dynamics of the arthropods is nevertheless not curbed. Bacteria and algae fill the void left by the animals that are becoming rare. The environment is similar to that of the pre-Cambrian. The trees which had led to its loss will now contribute to give life to the earth. They produce more and more oxygen, and slowly the temperatures will increase until they stabilize. The seasons reappear, and life can once again diversify. Panderichthys began a transition to legged evolution a few million years ago. They have curious fins. Fish fins are normally made of spiny rays, which are either rigid or soft and flexible. In both cases, they are exoskeletal pieces that support the non-muscular skin fold of the fin. In Panderichthys, the fins are articulated on only one element, without any other ray. They leave a glimpse of humerus, a radius, and an ulna, then end with a flexible veil covered with scales. It is this famous veil that today gives way to a new structure, the fingers. These fingers would be an abnormal embryonic development of the end of the fins. Usually, the end of the fish embryos forms an apical ridge, which generates the growth of the bony rays of the fin. Once all the rays are formed, the ridge peels off, which stops the formation of new bony structures on the fin and ends in a veil. In the first tetrapods, this famous ridge did not come off, and the bone structure continued on its way, giving shape to the arm, forearm, wrist, and then the phalanges. This is how new forms of aquatic animals appeared: tetrapods equipped with functional gills, covered with scales, feeding on fish, and endowed with limbs with fingers. Initially, this evolution is certainly not an adaptation to terrestrial life, but rather to the muddy environment and cluttered with branches and roots of trees. These very rudimentary legs are similar to a kind of paddle. They are rigid, not very functional, and are not at all adapted to support massive fish. A few million years later, the sea level continues to drop, and the land surface becomes larger and larger. Bodies of water become isolated from each other. Tetrapods are better equipped to live in this new environment. Now equipped with gills and lungs, they are able to move from one water body to another. The Ichthyostega is one of the first vertebrates to have 4 legs. It is a descendant of the long-extinct Tiktaalik. The Ichthyostega lives near rivers, lakes, and marshes. It is forced to go on land to look for food, which explains why its future generations will be more terrestrial than aquatic. Thanks to its long pointed teeth, it feeds on fish, insects, but also small terrestrial animals. It can reach up to 2 meters or 6 feet in length, and 20 centimeters or 8 inches in height. Its skull resembles that of primitive fish, with small eyes located on its dorsal side, which gives it a very good field of vision. Its body is covered with scales, and it has a very strong spine, due to the adaptation to terrestrial life. Although it has some kind of legs, it is rather at ease in the aquatic environment, since its 7 fingers are connected by a membrane. But it is an easy prey for other predators with which it must compete for food, which explains its big step for the dry land. Alongside Ichthyostega, Acanthostega evolves between terrestrial and aquatic environment. With a length of 60 centimeters or 23 inches, It has 8 fingers on each hand. Its stiff-jointed limbs prevent it from bending properly and do not allow it to lift its weight on land. They are more efficient for swimming. It will need further development to be completely comfortable out of the water. It breathes thanks to its lungs and reproduces in water. It has a lateral line that allows it to detect vibrations. 360 million years ago, the Earth is enjoying a relative lull. The average temperature on its surface is 20 degrees Celsius, or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It is warm and humid in the lower latitudes, although the southern part of Gondwana is covered with ice. Forests and swamps abound, and lush vegetation flourishes. As the plant matter decays, it turns into the black or dark brown sedimentary rock, known as coal. This rapid expansion of plants leads the Earth into an oxygen age. As all plants photosynthesize, the concentration of oxygen in the air increases until it exceeds the current concentration. This hyperoxygenated atmosphere favors the development of arthropods, and even some vertebrates, until they reach disproportionate sizes. The anatomy of arthropods explains this gigantism. Their open circulatory system allows their blood to circulate freely in the body cavities, bathing the organs, and not inside vessels. Their body is covered with small openings, the spiracles, which allow oxygen to reach the circulatory system. Oxygen then diffuses into the tissues through small tubes, the tracheoles. Variations in the concentration of atmospheric oxygen will thus have an impact on the size of arthropods. The Earth's tectonic plates continue their movements. Laurasia, which includes Laurentia, Baltica, and Avalonia, collides with Gondwana, which includes all the other land masses. Middle Europe emerges as high mountains. The Appalachians slowly rise in North America. A new supercontinent, Pangaea, begins to form. The latter includes almost all the existing continents, except Siberia for a while. A new generation of plants appears, whose sexual generation lives at the top and no longer at ground level. Among them, the cycads. Dressed with large rough fronds, cycads look like ferns. Some plants produce spores spread by the wind. Others produce larger ones, which remain fixed to the mother plant. They evolve in conical phallus, in which ovules are differentiated. When a spore is carried by the wind in the phallus, it germinates and forms a long tube, which digs its way in the female cone. Once completed, a sperm is produced, looking like a majestic sphere that can be seen with the naked eye. It slides down the tube, fuses with the egg, and fertilization takes place. In this time, other plants appear. The conifers with pines, cedars, larches, and firs. The conifers protect their trunks from external attacks by secreting resin. It is fluid and flows from a notch. It is composed of turpentine, and once the turpentine has evaporated, it freezes. The resin then takes on the appearance of a gum, which closes the wound and traps the insects that touch it. The appearance of the amniotic egg is a real revolution in the evolution of species. This egg is that of birds, reptiles, and monotremes. The shell of the amniotic egg is hard and porous. The embryo inside can breathe oxygen from the air, but not from the water. Thus, if an amniotic egg is immersed in water, the embryo dies of asphyxiation. The yolk of the egg is a food reserve sac, intended to feed the embryo, which allows it to hatch at an advanced stage of development. Inside the egg, the embryo evolves in a sac filled with amniotic fluid, called amnion. It is protected from dying out and shocks. Amniote species are totally free of the aquatic environment. At the same time, amniotes develop a dry and relatively waterproof skin, which slows down the water losses. Henceforth, they can move away from the water points and venture toward zones inaccessible until then. Insect wings begin upstream as dorsal blades. They then acquire a circulation. There are 6 of them at this time. Wings confer a significant evolutionary advantage in the world of living things. By mastering the air, these insects become dominators of the land. By flying, the insects move at a crazy speed. They multiply and are the first to reach virgin land, the other side of the river, or the tops of trees. They escape from their numerous predators on the ground, such as spiders, amphibians, or scorpions. But the threat is now coming from among them. The oldest winged insects and the largest airborne predators of this era are the dragonflies. There are many species of them. At that time, dragonflies, like the Meganeura, took advantage of the lack of competition to grow to gigantic sizes, up to 70 centimeters or 28 inches wingspan. But as soon as the air starts to become populated, the giant dragonflies disappear. Dragonflies have 2 pairs of wings articulated with their body. This allows them to move vertically and travel through the air at speeds of over 30 kilometers per hour, or 19 miles per hour. To avoid collisions at such high speeds, they are equipped with sharp senses. Their 2 huge faceted eyes give them a vision of almost 360 degrees and an amazing precision. Dragonflies are daytime shoehorners, hardly more discreet. The Paleodictyopteron roams the air with its 55 centimeter or 22-inch wingspan. These insects are characterized by mouthparts under the head that allow them to suck sap. A little further down on the ground, the Pulmonoscorpius is a kind of large scorpion that reaches several tens of centimeters. It feeds on other arthropods. Arthropleura likes the abundant vegetation of this time, and it does not pass unnoticed. The genus of millipedes is one of the largest terrestrial vertebrates that ever existed. It measures up to 2.5 meters or 8 feet long and weighs about 50 kilos, that is to say 100 pounds. Its large size repels predators without counting its carapace, which serves as protection. It is herbivorous and thrives in wet and swampy environments. In spite of its cumbersome size, it moves easily on the ground of the forests. It happens to find itself in front of Diplocalus, an amphibian which marks the spirits because of its original anatomy. Indeed, its particularity is its spectacular boomerang-shaped head, much larger than the rest of its body, which gives it a disproportionate look. It measures about a meter in length and some 10 centimeters or 4 inches in height, and weighs about 7 kilograms or 15 pounds. It lives between ponds and marshes and can go back and forth between the aquatic environment and the land. It eats fish and small insects. During its search for food, it tries not to cross paths with pelycosaurs for whom it would be an easy prey. Among the best known of this genus The Dimetrodon is noticed by the large sail it carries on its back. This giant lizard can reach up to 4.5 meters or 15 feet and weigh more than 250 kilograms or more than 550 pounds. It is one of the largest predators of its time. Its sail is made of elongated spines starting from the vertebrae. Its numerous and large teeth allow it to attack many animals: fish, tetrapods, reptiles, amphibians. The presence of insects strongly contributes to the revolution of the plant world that is beginning. The first trees existed in two successive forms, sexual and asexual. Thanks to their high size, spores are carried and disseminated easily by the wind. For the sexual cells, the meeting is ensured in the water by the male cells, imposing them to maintain themselves close to the ground. For ferns, horsetails, and lycopods, this mode of reproduction is not a problem. The spores develop into small shoots, the thallus. Once fertilized, they evolve into small plants that will carry the spores. But the thallus on the ground is vulnerable. It attracts animals and dies if it is dried out. In addition to the wind, flying insects help to disperse the spores by moving from tree to tree. The continental block Siberia joins the already welded block of Laurasia and Gondwana. Pangaea is now complete. This last collision raises the Ural, a mountain range. The superocean Panthalassa, ancestor of the Pacific Ocean, surrounds Pangaea. It takes a C shape with the equator for center and is barred by the Hercynian chain. The ocean that forms in the hollow of the crescent is the Tethys Ocean. The formation of such a supercontinent has repercussions on life. On the continent, the distance of the lands of the center of Pangaea compared to the ocean causes a strong decrease in precipitation. Huge deserts are formed in these regions. The aquatic environment is also modified because the length of the coasts having decreased, the surface of the coastal waters also, and consequently, many marine species disappear. Pangaea remains a cradle of life, lined with forests, fresh springs, and creatures stranger than the others that are found everywhere. Reptiles adapt to these conditions and develop thermoregulation systems. The therapsids, or mammalian reptiles, take on a new form of protection: fur. This new appearance of reptiles is reminiscent of our current mammals. Therapsids are the prey of an outstanding predator, the terrible Gorgonopsian. This carnivore has overdeveloped canines and incisors, which allows it to attack both small and large animals. It can reach the size of 5 meters or 16 feet long and weigh up to 350 kilograms or more than 750 pounds. Despite the apparent calm and equilibrium that thrives, the bowels of the earth are still boiling. Just over 250 million years ago, in present-day Siberia, a large province called the Siberian Traps was formed. It is under the Earth's crust that everything is played. Gigantic columns of magma are heading towards the surface. Subjected to a strong pressure, the ground spreads out. Cracks appear over several hundred kilometers and miles, as if the Earth was opening in two. Streams of lava flow out of it. Volcanoes eject astronomical quantities of molten rock. In no time, the region is like a huge inferno. The tremors resound on all the surrounding lands. The animals present in the vicinity are immediately burned. The lava flows spread very quickly, and this is only the beginning. the eruption of the Siberian traps does not stop. That is what distinguishes it from the usual eruptions. It pours its flow of lava for 1 million years. The Earth being at that time formed of a single continent, the ocean of liquid rock spreads everywhere. After about 10 years, the volcanic gases accumulate in the atmosphere. Gigatons of carbon dioxide and sulfur are volatilized, with dramatic consequences for the climate. The carbon dioxide captures heat, and the sulfur obstructs the passage of sunlight. Episodes of cooling and warming follow one another, making life very difficult. Oxygen levels in the air drop, and animals struggle to breathe. Some of them show amazing resilience. Smaller animals are more successful in finding refuge, and those living in communities combine their strength to survive the nightmare. Cold-blooded animals are more resistant to climate change because they can regulate their body temperature. They need less energy to survive. When the basaltic rock bursts out, it transforms in contact with the air into solid rock of a deep black. Immense mountains are formed, drawing a landscape of desolation. The living is killed or pushed away, and yet the Earth is not at the end of its sorrows. Volcanic sulfur dioxide mixes with water vapor to form sulfuric acid. Torrents of acid rain are now falling on the planet. The trees are ravaged, and the vegetation is decimated. Shelter is now scarce for the survivors. The warming phases of the planet cause a cascade effect of warming of the oceans. The aquatic environment suffers from a lack of oxygen and threatens the marine species. The methane hydrates present at the bottom of the oceans are maintained in a solid state thanks to the pressure and low temperatures. Under the effect of global warming, these methane hydrates are in their gaseous state and methane is released. This greenhouse gas is 21 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Vegetation, which usually regulates the proportion of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, is absent. The warming accelerates considerably. The flora is dying out, suffocated under this immeasurable heat. The base of the food chain is threatened, and famine sets in. The herbivores are the first to be threatened, followed by the species that fed on these same herbivores. In all Pangaea, the vegetation disappeared. Life is close to total extinction. Heavy rains carry the dead plants to the ocean. The ocean fills with waste that rots because of the heat. Air and water no longer circulate. The majority of the ecosystems that predominate in the aquatic environment are threatened. Bacteria subsist in this gigantic landfill and produce hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas when released in large doses into the atmosphere. It is carried all over the surface of the planet by the winds and causes the death of a great number of animals. The Earth has entered a vicious cycle that is killing slowly. 150,000 years after the Siberian Traps eruption began, the lava flow reaches a depth of 1,600 meters, or more than 5,200 feet deep. The lucky few who survive adapt, and new generations appear. It is not until 500,000 years after the eruption began that it began to subside. The traps poured more than 6 million square kilometers of lava over the entire surface of the Earth, representing an area equivalent to 2/3 of the United States. The Permian extinction is the most important that the living world has endured. It is 70% of the species that disappeared on the continents. In the oceans, This extinction affects half of the families, 3/4 of the genera, for a total of 95% of the species. Trilobites, reef-building corals, and among others, pedunculated echinoderms are disappearing forever. The tropical paradise has been replaced by a hostile world, and it will take a very long time for the Earth to recover from this catastrophe. Under the effect of plate tectonics, Pangaea begins to fracture gently. It is only 50 million years later that rifts begin to separate North America and Africa. Following the formation of this rift, the Atlantic Ocean opens and divides Pangaea into two parts, a northern part and a southern part, that will be Gondwanaland and Laurasia. The passage of the ocean near the parts that were previously the center of Pangaea humidifies this environment that remained dry and arid until then. From now on, several continental masses are in place, and the oceanic currents are favored. Interactions between terrestrial and aquatic environments increase, and new ecological niches appear. Species are diversifying. Climate change also plays a significant role in the diversification of plants. Here we are in dinosaur land. This is Pangaea. A vast ocean called Panthalassa surrounds this landmass, forming a single continent. Contrary to popular belief, Pangaea does not have a single climate. The land of the dinosaurs was neither a vast swamp, as far as the eye could see, nor an almost tropical jungle. The climate was not the same on either side of the continent. In the center of Pangaea, comprising present-day Europe, the Americas, and Africa, the climate was predominantly desert. On the other hand, what is now India, Siberia, and even Antarctica enjoy a temperate climate. The Earth is a far cry from what we know today. It's as if someone has mixed up all the pieces of the puzzle. Nothing seems to fit. And yet, for tens of millions of years, this was the configuration of the Earth. This unique land was also the cradle of the dinosaurs. These animals experienced a variety of climates, geological periods, and adapted to different environments, from deserts to mountains to jungles. Around 230 million years ago, the first members of the dinosaur group began to appear. Depending on geographic zone, environment, and climate, animals diversified to adapt. If you remember from our little introduction, we mentioned almost 1,200 species, and that's just the species known to man. So you can imagine the diversity that reigned in this large family. When we think of dinosaurs, we immediately think of large animals, but the earliest dinosaur specimens are a far cry from the usual cliché of giant dinosaurs. The oldest confirmed dinosaurs, which lived 230 million years ago, were Saurischians. First of all, there's Saturnalia, a dinosaur whose classification was long debated until 2007, as it includes features of both sauropodomorphs and theropods. It measures around 1 to 2 meters, or 3 to 6 feet in length, and is probably no taller than an adult's knees. At the same time, there was also the Staurikosaurus. This ancestor of both sauropods and theropods was discovered in South America. It's hard to describe it with any precision because we're up against our scientific limitations here. We lack real, identifiable, and analyzable elements. With the few remains that researchers have at their disposal, they have been able to make estimates. Judging by the size of the jaw, it seems to be one of the smaller dinosaurs, measuring 2 meters or 6 feet long. It probably weighs just 30 kilograms or 66 pounds. Its sharp teeth suggest a carnivorous diet. That's about all we know about it. Then there's Herrerasaurus. He too is a bipedal carnivore. It measures between 3 and 5 meters, or between 10 and 16 feet long, just 1 meter or 3 feet high, and weighs up to 350 kilograms or 770 pounds. It's a pretty fearsome carnivore. It has a jaw with a flexible articulation and sharp curved teeth. This mouthful of teeth enables it to rip the flesh off all the vertebrates in its ecosystem, including herbivores of the Rhynchosaur order, such as Hyperadapodon huxleyi, and the Decynodont order, as well as omnivores of the Etasaur order, such as Aetosauroids scaglii. Another dinosaur in the featherweight category is the Euraptor. It too is very small compared to the Diplodocus or Brachiosaurus that illustrate children's tales about dinosaurs. It measures just 1 meter or 3 feet long and 40 centimeters or 16 inches high. He was probably more of an omnivore. He had 5 fingers on each hand. The 3 longest ended in large claws, which he used to hold his prey. He would quickly pounce on them to take them by surprise and stack the odds in his favor. But thanks to its large claws, it could also catch plants. It is assumed that it fed on small animals, tender leaves, and fruit. Paleontologists who have studied the remains of Euraptor believe it to be one of the oldest known dinosaurs. Why do they think so? Because it is not a highly evolved predator. All the evidence suggests that it is a primitive dinosaur, so to speak. Unlike theropods, it doesn't have a slippery lower jaw to hold its prey. Likewise, only a few of its teeth are curved and crenulated. In a more evolved predator, all the teeth have acquired this shape. Yet we know that Euraptor belonged to the Saurischians thanks to the configuration of its thighs and pelvis. Euraptor is therefore older than Herrerasaurus. Finally, there's Allwalkeria, considered a basal Saurischian, a small bipedal omnivore that shares many similarities with Euraptor. These are the first small dinosaurs you might have encountered in the Triassic period. But other dinosaurs, even in the Jurassic era, were small. Compsognathus is no longer than 1 meter or 3 feet and weighs around 2.5 kilograms or 5 pounds. Despite this, it has made its mark on the land of giants, just like the Anchiornis. It measures no more than 30 centimeters or 12 inches high. Its bird-like appearance has complicated its classification by scientists. But Michael Pittman, a paleontologist from the University of Hong Kong, and some of his colleagues seriously believe that it was either a primitive bird or a bird-like crawdontid dinosaur. In other words, it is a primitive member of the dinosaur group, which includes birds and bird-like dinosaurs. They share their closest common ancestor with birds. In the Cretaceous, too, we can still encounter small dinosaurs. In 2022, scientists discovered one of them. The paleontologists published their discovery in the journal Scientific Reports, describing a dinosaur between 94 and 97 million years old. It measures around 1.5 meters or 5 feet in length including tail, and weighs between 4 and 7 kilograms, or between 9 and 15 pounds, about the size of a domestic cat. The animal is robust, yet knows how to protect itself. Fossils have revealed the presence of a series of bony plates between the neck and tail. This is Jacopil, Caniacura. Not all dinosaurs were giants. We could mention many other dinosaurs of modest size, but I'd like to tell you about the origins of these animals, about their ancestors, who are just as modest in size as those we've just mentioned. The first dinosaurs appeared at the end of the Triassic period. Their anatomy has a number of features in common, which is why they form a group and are thought to share a common ancestor. They have reduced fourth and fifth fingers, 4 legs, a tail, thick skin, and a pelvis united by 3 or more sacral vertebrae. They also have oviparous reproduction and legs located under the body rather than on its sides. This is what unites dinosaurs within the same family and allows us to attribute common origins and a common ancestor to them. So who was the ancestor of the dinosaurs? This common ancestor is to be found among small, lightly built archosaurs that show the beginning of dinosaur locomotor adaptations, such as Marasuchus, discovered in the Middle Triassic of Argentina, or Congonaphon kelly. It's the latter, measuring just 10 centimeters or 4 inches, that we're mainly interested in. Can you imagine? 10 centimeters or 4 inches only, and yet he's the father of such colossi as Diplodocus, Argentinosaurus, Brachiosaurus, T-Rex, Stegosaurus, and Triceratops, whose dimensions are far more generous than his. Congonaphon is small, very small if you compare its measurements with those of the most popular dinosaurs, but it is one of the last common ancestors of dinosaurs and pterosaurs. It is therefore at the very origin of the evolution towards dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and pterosaurs belong to the Ornithodire or clade, their last common ancestor before their separation some 230 to 240 million years ago. Congonaphon kelly is close to the divergence between dinosaurs and pterosaurs. It could therefore be one of the missing links in biological evolution. But how did this little creature manage to survive and get through the climatic crises? As we saw above, the Permian-Triassic crisis led to a drop in biodiversity. As this drop in biodiversity impacted plant life, oxygen production fell. The depletion of oxygen in the atmosphere would have favored species with air sacs, such as the ancestors of the dinosaurs. The latter also had down covering their skin, as is the case with Congonaphon. This would have helped its thermoregulation. As the second half of the Triassic period was characterized by extreme climatic changes, with very hot days followed by very cold nights, the small feathers would have enabled the creature to maintain a comfortable internal temperature. Speaking of origins and evolution, you may have noticed that dinosaur species are very diverse. It's a very heterogeneous group, and yet we classify them all in the same group. It's hard to find a glaring similarity between the Anchiornis and the Ankylosaurus, isn't it? And yet they do belong to the same group, and we're going to find out why. To better appreciate and understand dinosaurs, it's important to be able to tell them apart and classify them. There are two main groups of dinosaurs. We sometimes confuse these groups with their diet, whether carnivorous or herbivorous, or their posture, whether on 2 or 4 legs. The difference between these two groups lies in their pelvis. The orientation of the pubis, a bone in the pelvis of tetrapods, points downwards and forwards in saurischians, and rather backwards in ornithischians. Determining and understanding what distinguishes these two groups will enable us to learn more about dinosaurs. Saurischians differentiated themselves around 230 million years ago. They are themselves divided into two groups. First, there are the theropods. Theropod means animal feet. Theropod fossils have been discovered on every continent, in rocks dating from the Upper Triassic to the Upper Cretaceous, i.e., from around 225 to 65 million years ago. Theropods are bipedal, generally carnivorous. Their hind limbs provide support and locomotion. The front limbs are short, but equipped with movable fingers. These fingers are undoubtedly adapted for grasping and tearing prey. There are several major groups of theropods. The oldest is the Ceratosaurus. They range in size from the tiny Colophysis, less than 2 meters or 7 feet long, to the Ceratosaurus, around 6 meters or 20 feet. Then there are the Tetanurians. These are the successors to the ceratosaurs we've just seen. The Tetanurians include carnosaurs such as Allosaurus and Coelurosaurus, a larger group that includes tyrannosaurs, dromaeosaurs, and ostrich dinosaurs. In both Coelurosaurs and carnosaurs, many bones were hollow, and the jaws generally bore sharp, curved teeth along their entire length. Herrerasaurus, one of the oldest known dinosaurs, was undoubtedly a theropod, or one of their close cousins. Colophysis was probably one of the first theropods. This group also includes Tyrannosaurus, Velociraptor, and Baryonyx. These bipeds vary in size. They can weigh anything from a few kilos to nearly 6 tons. Sauropodomorphs are quadrupeds, generally herbivores. They have small heads resting on long necks. They also have long tails. Their group name means lizard-footed form. In the late Triassic, there were 2 main groups of sauropodomorphs. The prosauropods, which means before lizard feet, and therefore before sauropods, were medium-sized, like Lufengosaurus. Then there were the sauropods, meaning lizard feet, which could reach gigantic sizes, like Apatosaurus. Diplodocus and Argentinosaurus belonged to this group. They had imposing bodies and large stomachs, enabling them to digest large quantities of foliage. Most also had thumbs, terminating in large claws. Plateosaurus is a fine example of a sauropodomorph. It measures between 8 and 9 meters or 30 feet in length. It probably moves most of the time on its 4 legs, but it can stand up on its 2 hind legs. Prosauropods and sauropods spread throughout the world. While prosauropods disappeared in the lower Jurassic, sauropods continue to diversify throughout the Mesozoic. The other major group is the Ornithischians. A large part of the pubis is directed downwards and backwards as in birds, and not downwards and forwards as in most reptiles. When it comes to birds, then, we'd be inclined to think that their ancestors were Ornithischians. But, paradoxical as it may seem, birds are descended from Saurischian dinosaurs. But back to the group of dinosaurs with bird-like pelvises. The Ornithischians can be divided into two subgroups, the Sauropods and the Theriophores. Theriophorus means shield-bearer. They have a cuirass on their backs with bony plates, but sometimes also spikes or spurs. Herbivores, theriophores, are armored dinosaurs and, for the most part, quadrupedal. They comprise two main groups, stegosaurids and ankylosaurs. These two groups share not only dermal armor, but also a variety of other features, including their small teeth, arranged in a single curved row. Both groups derive from a line of smaller armored dinosaurs, such as Scutellosaurus and Scelidosaurus from the lower Jurassic. The sauropods include the ornithopods, pachycephalosaurs, and ceratopsians, the latter two groups often grouped together under the name marginocephalans. Ornithopods are known from the beginning of the Jurassic to the end of the Cretaceous. They are therefore among the dinosaur lineages that had the greatest and longest evolutionary success. This group includes the Frabrosaurids, Heterodontosaurids, Hypsilophodontids, Iguanodontids, and Hadrosaurids. Fabrosaurs are the oldest and most primitive ornithopods. These small, lightly built dinosaurs grew to between 60 and 120 centimeters, or between 24 inches and 47 inches in length. Hadrosaurs, on the other hand, could reach 9 to 11 meters, or 30 to 36 feet in length. They are duck-billed dinosaurs. Their posterior teeth, crushing and located inside cheeks, were very well adapted to chewing vegetation. They traveled in herds and cared for their young, who were very immature at birth, as is the case with most mammals and birds today. Hadrosaurs include Shantungosaurus, Parasaurolophus, and Lambeosaurus. Hypsilophodontidae are great runners. They measure between 1.5 and 4 meters, or between 5 and 13 feet in length. This group includes Hypsilophodon. Among the iguanidae, of course, we find one of the most popular dinosaurs, the iguanodon. Equipped with complex teeth, typical of advanced ornithopods, it is the largest of its kind, reaching 11 meters or 36 feet in length. So here's what we can learn from the great dinosaur family and the Saurischian and Ornithischian groups. Despite their great divergences, dinosaurs have a lot in common and a common origin. Biological evolution has enlarged the family with groups and subgroups. But there's one thing we forgot to mention. We didn't mention marine dinosaurs or flying dinosaurs. In your opinion, are they classified as Saurischians or Ornithischians? Well, we can't classify them in the dinosaur family, for the simple reason that they're not dinosaurs. These marine reptiles from the dinosaur era are sometimes called marine dinosaurs, seemingly logical. But dinosaurs are only terrestrial. No dinosaurs lived exclusively in water. Marine reptiles mistaken for dinosaurs do not have the same characteristics, origins, or common ancestor as dinosaurs. They therefore do not belong to the same group as dinosaurs. Ichthyosaurus, Plesiosaurus, and Mosasaurus are marine reptiles. Why differentiate between these two families, dinosaurs and marine reptiles? Why isn't the animal we see here moving in the ocean a dinosaur? Yet it lived in the Mesozoic era at the same time as the dinosaurs. As we have seen, specific animal classification criteria lay the foundations for each family, each class, each group. In that of the dinosaurs, we noted that these animals had 4 legs, and that these were located under the belly. This is not the case with our marine reptiles. As you can see, if they do have 4 legs, they are only on the sides, on the animal's flanks, and not under its belly. Dinosaurs and marine reptiles don't have the same common ancestor either. Marine reptiles cannot therefore be dinosaurs. We're looking at an ichthyosaurus. This sea behemoth can reach up to 20 meters or 66 feet in length. It's a very popular marine reptile that looks a bit like our modern-day dolphins. This carnivorous reptile had an elongated snout and powerful jaws with sharp teeth. It fed on fish, ammonites, cephalopod mollusks with spiral shells, and belemnites, cephalopod mollusks related to cuttlefish. We imagine it to be a fearsome predator. Indeed, it has been for nearly 160 million years, but limiting its lifestyle to this trait is a bit simplistic. Contrary to our image of a solitary aggressive predator, Ichthyosaurus was also a social animal. A recent study into the behavior of ichthyosaurs was published in Cell magazine in November 2022. The results clearly show that Ichthyosaurus had similar habits to our whales. Ichthyosaurs migrated extensively and above all lived in groups during the birthing season. The team of paleontologists in charge of this study used a micro CT X-ray scanner to study a precise geographical area, a fossil deposit located in the Humboldt Toyab Forest in Nevada, USA. They found embryos and newborns of a species of ichthyosaur called Shawnosaurus. Why were so many ichthyosaurs concentrated in one place? This is the mystery that paleontologists have been trying to unravel. Thanks to the use of technology and various analysis tools, a climatic cause, such as a sudden change in temperature, has been ruled out. Nothing had disrupted their ecosystem. Mass stranding has also been ruled out, as scientists are now confident that the bones sank to the bottom of the sea. It's likely that there was no food for them in this region, and yet we can see a large number of newborns and embryos. So what does this tell us? Well, the American National Forest, which could have been described as an ancient burial ground, is in fact an ancient maternity hospital. Ichthyosaurs used to gather here to give birth to their young. They were undoubtedly returning to the place where they themselves years earlier had given birth. But back to the dinosaurs, and to be more precise, the flying dinosaurs we haven't yet classified. Pterosaurs are part of the dinosaur bestiary. They lived during the same period. But pterosaurs are not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are ornithodyirid diapsid archosaurs. This somewhat barbaric term refers to a group of animals. It consists solely of dinosaurs and their descendants, and pterosaurs. These are the only two groups in this animal class. Of all the different groups of dinosaurs, the pterosaurs are the closest. It's hardly surprising, then, that we find a family resemblance and tend to confuse them. Pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to tame the sky, at least as far as we know. Like dinosaurs, pterosaurs come in a wide variety of species. Some, like the sordae, measure barely 60 centimeters or 24 inches, while others, like the anhangara, approach 4 meters or 13 feet. The pteranodon has a wingspan of over 6 meters or 20 feet long. But that's nothing compared to the gigantic Hatzegopteryx, which, with its wings spread, could practically cover a bus with its 10-meter or 33 feet wingspan. If they are so close to the dinosaurs, it's because they share a common ancestor. At some point in their history, evolution allowed dinosaurs on one side and pterosaurs on the other to hatch. What happened between this common ancestor and the pterosaurs? What are the stages of evolution? What are the different links in the chain that led to the birth of flying vertebrates, and thus to the hatching of pterosaurs? Well, the mystery remains, and the question still unanswered. For the moment, no tangible evidence has been found to fully and scientifically resolve this enigma. Millions of years have passed between the common ancestors and pterosaurs. The physical difference between the two is more than striking, since one is winged and the other probably a small four-legged terrestrial vertebrate. Even so, all the most primitive pterosaurs we know today are well developed, and several species already existed at this time. Evolution was well underway. The stage preceding this phase of evolution is not yet known. For the ancestor of pterosaurs to give rise to true pterosaurs, one species had to have evolved differently from the others. A species that would be closer to pterosaurs in terms of physical appearance or flight capabilities, but which would also have something in common with an exclusively terrestrial species. This key species is a fact we are certain of, but we currently have no fossils that would enable us to piece together the puzzle, to establish a sufficiently solid link to find this famous missing link. Nevertheless, one hypothesis seems more serious than the others, and could provide a semblance of an explanation for the missing link. If a species of terrestrial vertebrate jumped from tree to tree, or even hovered for a few seconds during its jump, like some flying squirrels, for example, then this species would be the keystone species. Some scientists believe that this famous species had a little skin between its legs, and probably lived in tropical forests. This evolution would have enabled it to protect itself from ground-dwelling predators. If this species did indeed live in tropical forests, This would explain why we have found no fossil evidence of its presence on Earth. For fossilization to be possible, several conditions must be met. Immediately after death, the body must be buried under sediment, silt, or sand. Otherwise, the organism will decompose completely. If these initial conditions are met, the skeletal bones will be preserved, the rock will be created, mineralizing the bones, which will become a kind of stone and therefore a fossil. However, these conditions are extremely rare in the forest, which offers us very few fossils. When you think about it, it's quite paradoxical that the environment with the fewest fossils is also the one with the richest biodiversity. Indeed, if we look at today's tropical forests, they are home to the greatest variety of species. So we'll have to wait and see if we can find out more about the origins of pterosaurs. If this question remains unanswered, there are many others about dinosaurs that have been answered. It's time for us to find our dinosaurs and discover the many secrets they have to reveal. We've seen the difference between pterosaurs and dinosaurs, the difference between dinosaurs and marine reptiles, and we've even skimmed the classification of the different dinosaur species. But to really understand dinosaurs, we need to investigate further. A dinosaur is also renowned for being a cold-blooded, ferocious reptile and not very intelligent. But let's dive back into the Mesozoic era in the light of the latest knowledge and find out what life was like for the dinosaurs. The question of dinosaur body temperature often comes up. Were they cold-blooded or warm-blooded? One might think that these animals were cold-blooded. They are reptiles, so logically we'd compare them to the snake or lizard we know. But on the evolutionary scale, dinosaurs fall between birds and reptiles, and birds are warm-blooded. So what's really going on with dinosaurs? Research has been carried out recently, and the results are surprising to say the least. Scientists, including paleobiologist Jasmina Wyman from the California Institute of Technology, relied on technology, infrared spectroscopy, to be more precise, that targets the interactions between molecules and light. In other words, the method uses infrared to quantify the number of waste molecules in fossils. Why is this rate important, and what secret does it hold for us? An animal's metabolism essentially boils down to the efficiency with which it converts oxygen into energy. Warm-blooded, or endothermic animals have a high metabolic rate. They need to breathe large quantities of oxygen and eat more to maintain their body temperature. Conversely, ectotherms, or cold-blooded animals such as reptiles, have a more moderate activity level and depend on external conditions to maintain their body temperature. In short, they don't bask in the sun for pleasure, but out of necessity. They have a low metabolic rate. The metabolic rate, i.e. the greater or lesser capacity to convert oxygen into energy for life, is therefore the most convincing indicator of body temperature. The use of oxygen in an organism leaves traces. Technology allows us to detect these traces on fossils. These traces, in the form of bone remnants, can be detected using infrared light. We can now study metabolism from a new angle and calculate the metabolic rate, even in animals that disappeared millions of years ago. Once this rate has been calculated, we still can't determine the body temperature of the fossilized animal. This data must be compared with other verified and validated data to establish a scale of comparison. Based on this scale of magnitude, established on all the animals we know today, and by comparing these data, we can deduce the animal's body temperature. And dinosaurs were warm-blooded. At least most of them were. Of the two major groups of dinosaurs we mentioned earlier, the Ornithischians included some cold-blooded specimens, such as the Triceratops. But its large ruff undoubtedly helped to regulate its temperature. This may also be the case for Stegosaurus, with its spine, which also had a low metabolic rate. They were massive but slow herbivores. By contrast, the other group, the Saurischians, the most numerous in terms of species, and above all offspring, like the T-Rex for example, were essentially warm-blooded. Reconstructing the biology and physiology of extinct animals is one of the most difficult things to do in paleontology. This study adds a fundamental piece of the puzzle to our understanding of evolution. Their body temperature sheds light on their lifestyle and needs. The discovery that most dinosaurs were warm-blooded is a small revolution in the world of paleobiology research. We now know that dinosaurs were warm-blooded animals, but they were also oviparous. In other words, their mode of reproduction was through the egg. The amniotic egg has turned biological evolution on its head. Until the beneficial protection provided by the egg, we had to fight to survive. For the first few billion years, life was only able to establish itself in an aquatic environment. Water provided lift. But on land, surrounded only by air, it wasn't the same. The skeleton had to strengthen, solidify, and consolidate. The skin had to become thicker, and the mode of reproduction had to adapt. While some animals, notably reptiles, acclimatize to life on land, reproduction is more complicated. These animals had to lay their eggs in water. The egg is still fragile. It doesn't take much for life to hatch. Without a shell or protective membrane, out of the water it dries out and shatters the life it harbors. Over time, the amniotic egg makes its appearance, and this changes many things. The shell prevents evaporation of the water inside, while allowing gaseous exchanges inside. There's an internal membrane, the amnion, in which a liquid, the amniotic fluid, bathes. This liquid is precious. It protects the future little one. We used to think that dinosaurs were cold-blooded because we compared them to reptiles. To find out how long it takes dinosaurs to incubate eggs, we compared them to the birds they are closest to, which also lay eggs. By comparison, scientists estimated incubation times for dinosaurs at between 11 and 85 days. But this average is about to be called into question by a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and carried out in the USA. Darla Zelenitsky, assistant professor of geosciences at the University of Calgary in Florida, and her team of researchers took a close look at the embryos made available to them. They were able to analyze an egg of Protoceratops, a small herbivorous dinosaur of the Ceratopsian family that lived in the Upper Cretaceous. Its size is comparable to that of a sheep. The embryo studied came from an egg, weighing around 200 grams. Another embryo analyzed in the same study was that of a huge fossil of Hypocrosaurus, a duck-billed dinosaur whose egg weighed over 4 kilos. It looks like a basketball. This is hardly surprising when you consider that the size of an adult Hypocrosaurus is estimated at between 9 and 10 meters, or 33 feet long, and its mass at between 2.5 and 4 tons. What will the researchers analyze in the embryos to learn more about the incubation period? Well, they'll be looking at the teeth, as they hold all the answers. Teeth contain a wealth of information. For this study, the scientists are particularly interested in the growth lines of teeth. In fact, they function much like the rings on the stumps of a tree. Analysis of the dentition of these 2 embryos revealed that the incubation period was much longer than previously thought. This time, dinosaurs are closer to primitive reptiles than to birds. Protoceratops had an incubation period of at least 3 months, while Hypocrosaurus was probably over 6 months. This long period before the eggs hatched is probably one of the possible answers to why they became extinct. Indeed, during the climatic upheavals and the Cretaceous crisis, such a long incubation period may have been a serious handicap to the survival and perpetuation of the species. However, it's not for lack of trying on the part of the parents to protect their eggs and juveniles. After the egg, it's time to talk about parenthood. Were dinosaurs only ferocious, savage, and bloodthirsty beasts? Here again, studies reveal some surprising facts about these animals from another age. Some fossil remains even suggest quite the opposite. Dinosaurs were capable of fiercely defending their young, designing nests, educating, and passing on knowledge. The Protoceratops we mentioned earlier, a small herbivorous dinosaur with a duck-like beak, defended its eggs and nest with great fervor. It's a small herbivore and not well equipped for attack, but it doesn't give up. Using his beak and massive head, we can imagine him trying to ward off this velociraptor. The 2 adversaries, one fighting for the survival of his young, the other for his own survival, will both die fighting and end up buried by a sandstorm. At least, that's what the remains of their bones, intertwined with each other, have revealed. This story is far from being an isolated one among dinosaurs. Psittacosaurus fossils may also bear witness to the parental and benevolent spirit of dinosaurs. Paleontologists have found a single Psittacosaurus surrounded by 34 small dinosaurs clustered in a circle. Very little is known about their deaths. What we do know is that it was quick and took place in the midst of activity. At least that's what the positions in which the dinosaurs were found suggest. But what really interests us here is the large number of hatchlings and the presence of a single adult. This fossil configuration resembles a kind of dinosaur nursery. An adult plays the role of nanny, protecting the group's young. It's still too early to say, but it's possible that other dinosaur parents may have taken advantage of this nanny's help to fetch food for themselves and their young. Oviraptors, on the other hand, settled into their nests in the manner of the birds we know today, their bodies positioned in the center of the nest, and their arms stretched over the eggs to protect them. Fossils here once again confirm the protective nature of another member of the dinosaur family. In the 1970s, a gigantic fossilized nest was discovered that had been home to hundreds, of Maiasaurus specimens over 80 million years ago. Jack Horner, the paleontologist who discovered them, studied the fossils with great care. Their position, their configuration in relation to each other, the estimated age of each one, everything has been examined with a fine-tooth comb. This time, the clues reveal that dinosaurs were not only able to protect eggs, but also to play a protective role after they hatched. Indeed, they also looked after their young once they were born. But how can we be sure? Well, from the fossils found in and around these nests, we can see that there are several young of different ages in the same nest, and traces of fossilized vegetation. This means that Maiasaurs not only fed their babies directly in the nest, but also cared for both newborns and juveniles. Maiasaurus weren't the only ones to care for their young over a long period of time. Scientists have been able to prove through fossil analysis that Psittacosaurus and Massapondylus, for example, were also very involved parents. Among herbivores, we have been able to study footprints. This evidence is invaluable. They tell us how they moved. Did they move slowly or quickly, in groups or alone? But footprint studies can also tell us how the group itself functioned. Indeed, scientists believe that some herbivorous dinosaurs moved in herds to be alert to attacks. Numerous footprints have been found, enabling us to analyze the herd's workings in detail. It has been observed that young dinosaurs were placed among the adults, and that these herds were adept at long seasonal migrations. But there's another area where dinosaurs are just as surprising, that of intelligence. The intelligence of dinosaurs has long been the subject of debate. In the collective imagination, dinosaurs were simple reptiles, a little silly, not very bright, or even a little simple. In other words, they weren't intelligent. Why should we think so? This idea stems from the size of the dinosaur's brain, which was not very large. The most commonly used method of measuring intelligence is to compare brain size to body size, known as the encephalization coefficient. In many dinosaurs, notably the T-Rex, this EQ, or encephalization coefficient, was low. It was therefore thought that dinosaurs were not very intellectually developed, or thoughtful beings. Some of them stood out from the crowd, notably Troodon, reputed for many years to be the most intelligent dinosaur known, with an EQ of 6. Raptors rivaled them with an EQ of 5.8. To give you an element of comparison, humans have an EQ of 7.44. That's the highest. With humans at the top of the chain, it was felt that this method of calculation was a good way of assessing intelligence and making it measurable and comparable. Thanks to the fossils found, scientists were able to calculate this encephalic coefficient by comparing the size of the body with the size of the cavity housing the brain. But this method has since been called into question. Chimpanzees are renowned for their intelligence, as are many great apes, which are capable of creating tools for opening fruit or finding insects in stumps or anthills. They are also able to communicate and learn. Numerous experiments have been carried out, revealing the surprising abilities of these animals. However, if we look at the EQ, the chimpanzee would be an idiot, as it barely reaches 2.49. The limitations of this method are clearly evident. raptors and troodons may have been highly intelligent, but that doesn't mean that others weren't. Still less that we should generalize this lack of intelligence about all dinosaurs. Some might even surprise you. The Tyrannosaurus, for example, has long been lodged in the idiot category, and this is far from the case. In fact, Brazilian neuroscientist Susana Herculano Hazel has managed to count the number of neurons in the Tyrannosaurus brain. It turns out that he had no less than 3 billion. Admittedly, that's fewer than the human brain's 80 billion neurons, but it still puts it somewhere between the chimpanzee and the baboon. This means that the T-Rex was at least as intelligent as today's primates. How did the scientist manage to count the neurons without having the dinosaur's brain? While bones fossilize, brains do not. Susana relied on a law of scale. This law of scale has been consolidated year after year through research, studies, and the discovery of a very large number of animals. Thanks to this scale, which has been greatly enriched in recent years in terms of data, we know that in birds from the smallest hummingbird to the largest ostrich, via the hen and the eagle, the number of neurons is directly linked to the mass of the brain, itself directly linked to the mass of the body. In other words, we can know the number of neurons per gram of brain. This calculation is true for birds, but also for reptiles and crocodiles. The scale is different, but works for all of them. The statistical analyses carried out by the researcher show that for theropods, the relationship between body mass and brain mass follows the same law as for birds. This similarity could perhaps be explained by the fact that modern birds are descended from dinosaurs. What's certain in any case is that the T-Rex was far from stupid. It would have been capable not only of making tools, but also of passing on its knowledge. This process and the various data collected also allow us to update our knowledge in another area. Age is closely linked to the number of neurons. In other words, we can estimate the lifespan of different dinosaur species. We also know, based on what we've seen in reptiles, mammals, and birds today, that larger animals generally live longer, and that carnivores often have shorter lives than herbivores. While some dinosaurs measuring less than a meter only live for 5 or 6 years, dinosaurs such as the Brontosaurus, for example, could have lived for almost 80 years. As for the T-Rex, its life expectancy is estimated at between 25 and 40 years. Given its longevity and intelligence, the Tyrannosaurus could well have passed on its knowledge to its descendants. But it's not only in the field of dinosaur intelligence that we've strayed from the truth, either through lack of knowledge or simply by incorporating received ideas as real facts. Dinosaurs have a bad image. They're ferocious, aggressive, and bloodthirsty. As you can imagine, the truth is far more complex than that. It's the brain of the Thachodontosaurus antiquus that may just change the way people think about the subject. Dinosaurs could also be social animals. The remains of Thachodontosaurus antiquus were unearthed a long time ago. They were preserved in the laboratories of the University of Bristol and hadn't been studied since, at least not with today's technology. The scanner and various 3D imaging tools made it possible to produce a cast and shed light on the inner ear. They observed the existence of 2 large floccular lobes. Located at the back of the brain, they play an important role in balance. Their large size in this dinosaur suggests that it was probably bipedal, contrary to what was previously thought. The researchers were also able to reconstruct the anatomy of the inner ears of Thecodontosaurus and compare them with those of other dinosaurs. According to them, its hearing frequency was relatively high, enabling it to hear the sounds and cries emitted by various animals, including those of its fellow dinosaurs. A clue to possible sound-driven social interactions. So dinosaurs were intelligent and could even be social animals. We've talked about species diversity, lifestyle, reproduction, behavior, and even intelligence. But we've forgotten to talk about their habitat. Where do dinosaurs live? On Pangaea. Yes, but after that? Did they only survive in the middle of a vast swamp? What were the different environments inhabited by dinosaurs? Dinosaurs lived all over the Earth, but some lived in very specific regions, as is the case today for many of our modern-day animals. In the course of their research, paleontologists have been able to create maps of the world by imagining where dinosaurs might have lived. They draw on their knowledge of dinosaurs, animals, and biology, and on their interpretation of the remains and fossils found. These maps evolve over the millennia, following new geographical layouts and climatic changes, for example. The Triassic period, between 252 and 201 million years ago, was marked not only by the birth of the dinosaurs, but also by a very particular configuration of the Earth. Our planet is made up of a single continent, a single unique landmass, Pangaea. Dinosaurs cohabited and evolved on this unique land, yet some species never met. If the land is unique, the climate is not. Let's start at the center of Pangaea. Here it would appear that the interior was completely dry, enclosed behind massive mountain ranges that blocked out all moisture. The climate is almost desert-like. Near the equator, the climate is quite different, with lush, humid tropical forests. These may resemble the jungles found in the Amazon, for example. Other regions are more temperate. In short, the biotope is very different from one place to another on Pangaea. Each species has made its home in an environment suited to its own needs. Each species is equipped to adapt to the specific conditions of its environment. It would therefore be wrong to claim that all dinosaurs lived in swamps or rainforests. Dinosaur fossils have been found in areas thought to have been lake shores, lagoons, swamps, deserts, temperate forests, savannas, and plains. Dinosaurs occupied every one of these environments. Another surprising fact: their shelter. We always imagine dinosaurs near a body of water bordered by a jungle, or in the middle of a plain with mountains in the background. But dinosaurs, or at least some of them, were capable of making their own shelters. In 2007, paleontologists found fossils in an astonishing place, at least according to what we knew until then. The remains of 3 dinosaurs, 1 adult and 2 juveniles, were found in the chamber of a burrow. This means that the dinosaur had dug a tunnel more than 2 meters long, and at its deepest point had created a chamber in which its 2 young lived. This time, the fossils reveal a burrowing dinosaur. It's an Eryctodromaeus cubicularis. This herbivore was equipped not only to run, but also to dig. The snout is robust, with fused premaxillae. The shoulder blade is strong, and the vertebrae near the pelvis are fused, so this little dinosaur seems well equipped to dig energetically. But its two long legs probably also made it a fast runner. As you can see, dinosaurs are truly amazing animals, and with each new discovery, they never cease to amaze us. Yet 66 million years ago, these impressive charismatic creatures disappeared from our planet. Let's take a look back at how long they occupied the Earth and find out more about their extinction. Dinosaurs reigned supreme on Earth for over 165 million years. But is it really a reign at all? Did dinosaurs live alone on Earth during this long Mesozoic period? Dinosaurs reigned for 165 million years and diversified greatly. In fact, there were a great many dinosaurs roaming the continent. There were herbivores and carnivores, hunters, gatherers, burrowers, bipeds, quadrupeds, feathered and scaled, small and fast, heavy and slow, big and long. In short, the dinosaur family grew and developed. Today, some 1,200 species are known to us from fossil finds, but these are only the species that, thanks to a great deal of luck, have left fossils behind to testify to their presence. The vast majority have left no trace of their passage, simply because the conditions for fossilization were not present. This figure is therefore only a sample of the number of species that actually existed. If dinosaurs were numerous and occupied much of the continent, were they the kings of the Mesozoic? Were they the only species to live on Earth? We already know that marine reptiles and pterosaurs, the flying reptiles, were also present. But they weren't the only contemporaries of the dinosaurs. One might think that at the time of the land of the dinosaurs, mammals had not been able to find their place, that they had waited until after the Great Extinction to thrive. Researchers now claim that this is not quite true. Dinosaurs and mammals, or more precisely their ancestors, the mammaliforms, appeared at virtually the same time. In fact, Mesozoic mammals were far more diverse than previously thought. In fact, there were quite a few of them living alongside the dinosaurs. Some mammals were, of course, the prey of the most powerful or fastest carnivorous dinosaurs. But the predator-prey relationship wasn't always as straightforward as you might think. The discovery of one fossil in particular proves that not all mammals were at the mercy of the dinosaurs, quite the contrary. Repenomamus gigantic is a large mammal from the Mesozoic era, probably the largest of its time. Paleontologists have studied a fossil of this specimen found in present-day China. To understand the lifestyle and diet of this Repenomamus gigantic, paleobiologists analyzed its stomach contents, i.e. the traces of elements still present in its stomach. After studying the stomach contents, it turned out to be the remains of a Psittacosaurus and other reptiles. This mammal was therefore a carnivore, a good shoemaker, and didn't hesitate to take on dinosaurs. This example of carnivores should not, however, be taken as representative of the majority. Before the extinction of the dinosaurs, mammals were mostly nocturnal and insectivorous. Perhaps this is what enabled them to survive the crisis that marked the end of the Cretaceous. David Grossnickel, a researcher at the University of Washington in the USA, has carried out a number of studies on the subject. According to the work carried out by his team, mammals underwent 3 major evolutionary radiations over the course of their history. This enabled them to adapt to their environment and new ecological niches. They prospered and diversified. The new species that appeared were able to climb, slide, or dig burrows. Their diet shifted towards meat, leaves, and crustaceans, and at least 2 of these evolutionary radiations would have occurred, one at the beginning of the Jurassic, between 190 and 163 million years ago, and the other during the Upper Cretaceous, around 90 million years ago, at a time when dinosaurs were still thriving on Earth. Dinosaurs, too, underwent significant biological evolution and diversification. We've clearly seen great diversification and species evolution, both physically and in terms of intellectual and social capacities. If both families are thriving, this indicates that cohabitation between these 2 large groups was possible. Yet we are now approaching the end of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, they finally disappeared. Are mammals to blame? Is it a failure of evolution? In the collective imagination, all dinosaurs died out suddenly when this group of species was at its peak. They disappeared following an unprecedented cataclysm. So many errors in so few sentences. No, the dinosaurs didn't all disappear. No, not at their peak. And no, not suddenly. And finally, no, not following an unprecedented cataclysm. Mass extinctions have been numerous. The Tertiary Cretaceous crisis was significant, with 50% of species extinct. But nothing like the Permian Triassic crisis, which wiped out nearly 95% of the Earth's species. Secondly, none of these extinctions were so sudden and violent as to wipe out all species in just a few days. They were long periods of crisis, extending over thousands or even millions of years. Changes in temperature, very hot or very cold, changes in air composition, or even changes in ocean acidity, if they are spread over the whole globe and are too rapid for living beings to adapt, then lead to the onset of a crisis. It's gradual, but the impact is inevitable. Thousands of species are doomed to extinction. Scientists accept that the Cretaceous crisis had several origins. As we saw with the crisis at the end of the Permian, the causes of these crises are often multifaceted and marked by changes on a global scale. Traces of very strong volcanic activity can be found in the traps of the Deccan in present-day India. But during the same period, 65 million years ago, there was another major event that forever marked the history of our planet. A meteorite impacted the Earth in Mexico, at Chicxulub. The meteorite measured between 10 and 80 kilometers, or between 6 and 50 miles in diameter. An impact with a celestial object of such magnitude and speed causes irreparable damage and impacts all ecosystems. Permanent volcanic eruptions and the dust raised by the meteorite upset the order of things. The opaque atmosphere would have limited the sun's rays. Plants could no longer benefit from photosynthesis, their vital source of energy. Herbivores without vegetation were deprived of food and died in turn. Then came the carnivores, who also had no food to survive on. According to most scientific data, this extinction occurred very rapidly, in geological terms. The immediate and short-term effects of the impact, such as global fires, tsunamis, a prolonged night caused by aerosols and soot in the atmosphere, and a drastic drop in temperatures, are thought to have been catastrophic for many forms of life. This was followed by a long-term greenhouse effect due to the gases released on impact, causing global warming. The exact speed of the extinction is still debated, but many studies suggest that it could have taken place within a few years to several thousand years after the impact. Some species survived the upheaval. For example, small insectivorous animals, scavengers, tortoises, sharks, crocodiles, and many others survived. All this took place 66 million years ago, during the heyday of the dinosaurs. Well, not quite their heyday. In fact, it turns out that numerous studies carried out at the end of the Cretaceous period reveal that dinosaurs were in decline. Numbers, particularly of large specimens, were falling dramatically. Diversity was also declining. All this means that their demise was probably irretrievable. The explanation is still unclear. Some scientists believe that the fragmentation of the continents following the breakup of Pangaea worked to their disadvantage. Climate change modifying the climate and flora, rising sea levels, and other phenomena put large animals at a disadvantage in these smaller spaces. The emergence and diversification of flowering plants, notably angiosperms, may also have altered terrestrial ecosystems. While some dinosaurs were able to adapt to these new food sources, others, particularly the large specialized herbivores, may have been disadvantaged. However, it would be completely wrong to say that dinosaurs have disappeared. In fact, dinosaurs have not completely disappeared. That's right, their descendants still live among us, and they have managed to establish themselves in the four corners of the world with great ease. We meet many of them every day, without even imagining that their history goes so far back in time. I'm talking about birds. Indeed, the theropod family has survived the crisis. Remember, we talked about this family when we discussed the classification of dinosaurs? Theropods include tyrannosaurs, velociraptors, allosaurs, and even birds. Another important nuance. Birds are not representatives of the dinosaurs as you might think, but dinosaurs in their own right, forming one of the theropod families. The story of the dinosaurs is decidedly longer than we could have imagined, and far more complex than we thought. They are extraordinary animals whose study continues to surprise us to this day. Each new discovery is a small paleontological or biological revolution. So there's no end in sight to our journey into the land of the dinosaurs. We still have much to learn from these animals of another age.